Chapter 118. Like an immortal descending from the heavens, he descended calmly, his sleeves fluttering in the wind. He was indescribably otherworldly. However, his face was covered by a glittering golden mask. It gave one the appearance of extreme coldness and chilled one's heart. He flew over and landed on the cliff. His gaze flickered as he looked at the shackled man in gray with a gentle smile. "Brother Gu, it's been many years since we last met. I'm relieved that you're still as elegant as before." The man in gray said faintly, "If I remove these chains, I'll let you know that I'm even more elegant than before." The man in white laughed. His clothes were as white as snow, untainted by even a speck of dust. His voice was elegant. "Please forgive me, Brother Gu. I can't do such a foolish thing." The gray-clothed man laughed as well. "You're a complete bastard. Tell me what's the matter. Or perhaps you're just here to visit your prisoner." The man in white said, "It's still that matter. Brother Gu, you should understand why I'm here now." "I don't. Please explain." The man in white said, "The Great Heavenlock Formation that day locked an area of 1,000 miles around Tianxian Cliff. It took me decades of treasures to completely imprison the 9 little fellows, shape-shifting abilities, and capture them in one fell swoop. You told me that I can rest easy from now on. However, the situation may not be so optimistic now." The man in gray lifted his eyelids and said faintly, "Not optimistic? Didn't you promise me that day that you'll return my freedom after that? Did you do it?" "Brother Gu, you understand me," the man in white said sincerely. "You're extremely resourceful. How would I dare to let you go so recklessly? You should understand my choice." The man in gray smiled. "That's right, you wouldn't dare to let me go." There was a hint of pity in his eyes. "As for the 9 little fellows, I've actually told you long ago that everything is God's will. How can I believe in God's will?" The man in white stood on the edge of the cliff with his arms behind his back. His sleeves fluttered and rustled. The surrounding clouds gathered again, but were completely dispersed by his breath. "Brother Gu, you said that year that when the 9 Supremes returned, the world would be turned upside down, and the martial world would be dominated by you." The man in white spoke word by word. "I asked you back then, would there be only one person left in the 9 Supremes? Tell me no." He suddenly turned his head and looked at the man in gray. "Now tell me again, yes or no?" The gray-clothed man smiled and said, "This is a heavenly secret that cannot be revealed." A gentle smile appeared in the eyes of the man in white. "Brother Gu, you're forcing me." The man in gray lowered his gaze and said lightly, "Everything is destined by the will of the heavens, and it is also the calamity of my life." The man in white kept quiet for a moment before saying, "Brother Gu, you only have to tell me the truth. Which Supreme is still alive among the 9 Supremes?" The man in gray's brows twitched as his gaze froze for a moment, but he still smiled faintly. "I can only tell you that you won't be able to find him. That's all." The white-robed man let out a long howl, and all the clouds and fog within a circular area of 1,000 lis rose into the air with a bang. The clouds and fog in such a large area were all stirred up by his howl, and they rose thousands of feet into the air. The entire field of vision instantly became clear. The surrounding mountains were lush and lush, forming a beautiful picture. So beautiful. The man in gray looked at the mountains that had suddenly revealed themselves in a daze and murmured, "This is the secular world." His eyes turned half a circle to look at the man in white by the cliff and said softly, "This is the secular world." The man in white let out a long howl, releasing all the frustrations in his chest and regaining his initial composure. He smiled faintly and said, "That's right. What I've encountered is the secular world. What you've encountered is also the secular world. However, our temperaments are different, and so are our states of mind." The man in gray smiled faintly. "That's right. The tea has already cooled before the person has left." The man in white sneered and said, "That's why, Brother Gu, your name is really good. Gu Chaoyang is only watching coldly from the sidelines. The tea that belongs to you is slowly cooling down. There's no taste of tea anymore." The man in gray shook his head and said softly, the tea is cold, but the fragrance is still there. The fragrance doesn't dissipate, but it's in the heart." He lifted his head to look at the man in white. "The tea is cold for me and you, but the tea is still boiling for the others. The fragrance of the tea is still distant, undiminished by thousands of mountains and rivers. The man in white laughed. Brother Gu, we've been brothers for many years, we're very close. I really don't want to torment you. I only need you to tell me this. The man in gray said faintly, the tea is cold. Do you still believe what I said? The man in white was stunned. The man in gray said, if I told you that the 9 Supremes are all dead, would you believe me? If I told you that someone is still alive, would you believe me? The man in white said, I can buy your information. The man in gray sighed softly and said, Heaven's Inquisition is dead. Who are you going to buy it from? But Gu Chaoyang is still alive. The man in white said, then tell me, is anyone from the 9 Supremes still alive? The man in gray nodded faintly. I've told you before, everything is God's will. The man in white guffawed. This young brother has never believed in God's will. With a guffaw, he suddenly soared into the sky and turned into a cloud in the sky. His voice boomed like thunder, coming down from the 9 heavens. The 9 Supremes are not dead, they must be Yutong's men. Then, as long as I kill all of Yutong's men, the world will be at peace. Even if the world is picturesque, what's the harm of death? Seeing the devastation, my heart is at ease, ha ha ha. The laughter faded away. The man in gray closed his eyes and murmured, the wine of 1,000 years of worldly affairs is still fragrant. The tea of a lifetime of life is still warm. His desolate form floated up slowly, carrying the 5 chains with him. But he drifted into the cave as if he was weightless. There was not the slightest sound of the chains clashing. Only a desolate chant could be heard. The 9 Supremes hold the world in their hands. The clouds and mist of heaven and earth are at their mercy. When Yun Yang walked out of the door, he saw a middle-aged man in his 30s on the street, placing a little girl with 2 braids, dressed in floral clothes, on his shoulder. Although he only had one arm left, he still held on to his daughter tightly. The little girl twisted her waist happily on her father's shoulder, her voice soft and coquettish, as she giggled like silver bells. The man's face was filled with unconcealed affection. Everyone believed that as long as this man had something, he would give it to his daughter without reservation. In his heart, his daughter was the one and only treasure. She was his most precious little princess. Daddy, Daddy, look over there, there's candied haws. The little girl wriggled her body, giggling and squealing. All right, let's go take a look now. The man smiled contentedly and walked away with his daughter. Yun Yang stood with his arms behind his back, his gaze seemingly looking into the distance. Actually, all of his attention from the corner of his eyes had been focused on the little girl. Deep in his eyes, there was a sense of envy that came from the bottom of his heart. Daddy, Daddy, look over there, there's candied haws. The words echoed in Yun Yang's heart for a long time, a bitter smile hanging on the corners of his lips. Forget candied haws. He might not even have the chance to call out to his father in this lifetime. He had never had such a chance. Fang Mafei, who was beside Yun Yang, could acutely feel that there was an additional sense of loneliness emanating from his young master now. Yun Yang, who had stopped for a long time, suddenly strode forward. Walking to the vendor selling candied haws, Yun Yang tossed a silver ingot and took a stick of candied haws. The vendor called out for change behind him, but Yun Yang was already far away. Yun Yang brought the candied haws to his mouth and took a careful bite. The sweet and sour taste seemed to seep into his heart as he murmured, "It's delicious." He walked forward leisurely, chewing on the candied haws as if there was no one else around. In the depths of his eyes that no one could see, there was a deep pain that seemed to be trembling. Facing the morning sun, an indistinct mist seemed to rise from the corners of his eyes. Finally, when there was only one last candied haws left, Yun Yang wiped the skewer clean and carefully kept it, along with the last candied haws, into his sleeves. He murmured, "Just take it that you all bought it for me." Facing the sun, he smiled brightly and said softly, "I'm living very well." Chapter 119. Yun Yang first went to the west of the city and walked around the slums. Seeing the smiles on the faces of the disabled warriors, he felt much more at ease. He then went to the south of the city, then the east, west, and north. Yun Yang walked very quickly. Each step seemed soft and relaxed, but in reality, he had already covered dozens of feet. Feng Mafei held his breath as he followed him, not leaving him by even an inch. It was also during this afternoon that many people in the capital city felt as if they had seen a young master. He had an extraordinary bearing and was tall and handsome. It was as if he had walked a circle in front of their eyes. Yin Yang's pace was swift, and he had the help of his lightness skill. But it was already midnight after he had walked around the entire Tiantang city. He had not done anything but walk around for the entire day. He was like a lonely lion that was silently patrolling his territory. With pride and loneliness, he looked at the people who lived and worked in peace under his wings with satisfaction. When he returned, Lao Mei came up to him with a pale face. Old Marshal Chiu is here today. The corners of Yin Yang's lips twitched. If it were not for him, he would have gone out for a whole day. He asked faintly, "What is it?" "I heard that you left early in the morning." Old Marshal was furious. Lao Mei looked conflicted. "Before he left, he shattered our stone lion with a slap." Looking at the shattered stone lion, the corners of Yin Yang's lips twitched for a long time. Finally he clapped his hands and praised. "Old Marshal is still strong despite his age. Congratulations." He paused for a moment before continuing. "Go and order 100 stone lions tomorrow. Place 2 of them here each time. When Old Marshal comes over, they'll appease him." Lao Mei's face was filled with shock. "You mean you don't plan to see him anymore?" If Lao Mei did not know of Yin Yang's other identity, he would have tried to dissuade him. However, Lao Mei's stance had changed. He stood firmly on Yin Yang's side and approved of all of Yin Yang's decisions. Even if the other party was Old Marshal Chiu, it would not matter. Thus, he skipped this topic and moved on to another visitor. General Taizheng was here too. Lao Mei said. He brought a few boxes of the border's specialty fruits for Marquis Yun. Yin Yang sighed. Taizheng, he's already so poor, why would he bring fruits? Where are the fruits? He was eaten by those kittens. Lao Mei was speechless. Yin Yang was exasperated as well. Right, what did the old marshal say before he left? It's better if you don't convey it. It's better if I don't know about it. Yin Yang had already changed his mind. Let's eat. Eating is a serious matter. It was a pity that he couldn't stop eating. While they were eating, the 4 young masters came looking for them again. Boss Waha. I'm here again. Dong Tianling's unique voice was like a signature. Boss. Chen Wanfeng Xia Bingchuan Chiu Yinsan and Dong Tianling. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter had all gathered here with Yin Yang. Yin Yang sighed. Looking at these 4 fellows, he could not help but think of the 4 Seasons Tower. I knew Boss was eating. The 4 of us haven't eaten either. Dong Tianling chuckled, purposely putting on a I'm the closest to boss attitude. He then turned around and called out. Steward, come. Bring 4 more sets of cups and chopsticks. We're going to drink to our heart's content today. We won't go home until we're drunk. Lao Mei rolled his eyes at the fellow's lack of courtesy, but went to get them anyway. After a while, Dong Tianling finally got to the point. Boss, about the mystical beast you mentioned earlier. Guaranteed. Yin Yang did not beat around the bush. Then the luminary paste, will there really be a problem? Chiu Yunsen asked hesitantly. Have you gotten it? Yin Yang asked. Not yet. All in all, it's better to be careful. Yin Yang reminded. Never let your guard down. The 4 of them nodded solemnly, lowering their heads to drink quietly. The excitement in their hearts had long dissipated. The atmosphere of the night was destined to be gloomy. Yin Yang was in low spirits. Just as the 5 of them were drinking in silence, a ray of sword light flashed in the south of Tiantang City. A lean silhouette carrying a huge wine gourd on his back appeared in front of Tiantang City's gate, his gaze tinged with nostalgia. I'm back again. He wondered how the young lady from back then was doing. I've come back this time for something. Let's finish what we have to do and get the item first. After all, it can't be delayed any longer. The man smiled faintly. He glided into the city gate. Just as Yin Yang and the rest were drinking and bantering, suddenly bang bang bang. Someone knocked on the door. Someone called out from outside. Excuse me, is young Master Yun at home? It was already late at night. Lao Mei frowned and said, This voice is rather familiar. It's the voice of Chun San whom young master saved the other day. Chun San. Yin Yang frowned. There must be something urgent for him to come so late at night. Let him in quickly. Not long after, Chun San came in hurriedly and knelt down. Young master, please save my brothers, he kowtowed profusely. Yin Yang frowned and said, What happened? Stand up and speak. Yin Yang could clearly see that Chun San was limping, and his face was covered in scars. However, the scars seemed to have been there for quite some time. Chun San. Yin Yang's eyes shone with understanding. Did you go to the battle with the remaining soldiers? Chun San was stunned for a moment, then said in shame. Young master, please understand. Chun San did go to the battlefield, but I only met the enemy in one battle. Not only did I not kill a single enemy, but I came back covered in wounds. I've really lost face for young master. Yin Yang said seriously. What are you saying? There are things a man shouldn't do, but there are things he must do. You're a man of steel when you go to battle. Whether you kill the enemy or not is insignificant. Have all the brothers who went with you returned? The rims of Chun San's eyes reddened. Young master, Chun San is here because of this matter. After we retired from the army, we gathered together and lived together. Everyone looked out for each other and helped each other. Our days were bitter, but we lived in harmony. This time, our area also sent out 43 people. We lost 11 brothers in the previous battle, but 32 were lucky enough to return. But these few days, some of these brothers have been going missing. In the beginning, we thought they went out to catch up with their comrades after the battle, but more and more of them have been going missing. And they're all veterans who participated in the war. Chun San's voice was tearful. As of tonight, 9 people have gone missing. We don't know what's going on, but we can vaguely feel that these missing brothers will never come back. He was trembling all over. As a disabled veteran at the bottom of society, his world was only so big. The only person he knew from the upper class was Yin Yang, who had helped him when he was bullied. Now that something like this had happened, coming to Yin Yang for help was the best he could do, after a long period of hesitation. It was also the only life-saving straw in his heart. Yin Yang stood up abruptly, his eyes glinting. A large number of veterans have gone missing? A murderous aura suddenly surged out. Dong Tianling and the other 3 who were closer to Yin Yang shuddered without exception. How could such a murderous aura emanate from a young master of a noble family like Yin Yang? It was the aura of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. I'll go take a look. Yin Yang stood up. Let's go together. Dong Tianling and the rest stood up as well. You don't have to go. Yin Yang said calmly. The more people, the bigger the target. If I really need your help, I'll let you know. I won't be courteous. Xiao Yunsam patted his chest. Don't worry, boss. When the time comes, as long as boss says the word, we'll provide you with manpower, money and strength. With a wave of his hand, Yun Yang led Fang Mafei and Lao Mei out the door, leaving behind a single word. You guys play on your own for now. After a quarter of an hour, Yun Yang and the rest appeared in the south of the city, coming to a residential area that looked rather deserted. Every house in this area was very dilapidated. Although it was already late at night, when Chun San brought Yin Yang into the yard, they could still see 23 burly men standing up in an orderly fashion. These men, without exception, were all injured or disabled. Other than that, there were some old soldiers who were blind and had broken legs standing up as well. However, a few of them had broken legs and could not even stand properly, still leaning against the wall with a solemn expression on their faces. Indignation could hardly be concealed on these people's faces. Young Master Yun is here. Chun San's voice was excited. Young Master, please seek justice for us. Everyone knelt down in unison. Everyone get up quickly. Yin Yang felt a rush of warmth. What is going on? Everyone tell us first. Let us analyze the whole story. What is going on? Under Yin Yang's beckoning, everyone quickly sat in a circle and began narrating the events that had transpired. Fang Mafei had already floated up to the roof. With Fang Mafei, a 7th peak pinnacle expert, as a lookout, it was already considered safe in a place like this. As the crowd continued to talk, Yin Yang gradually formed a general outline of the current strange situation. For 9 consecutive days, There had been a missing soldier every day, and all of them had gone missing from this area. Everyone was in the same trench, comrades who had gone through thick and thin together. It was only logical that they could understand each other and have a tacit understanding. However, amidst the crowd's discussion, Yun-yang unexpectedly realized that the 9 missing people were the closest to each other and had the most tacit understanding. No, to be more precise, other than the 9 of them, their relationship with the other old soldiers was only average. However, they were truly devoted to each other. There were still 2 people among the remaining people who were closest to them. At this moment, it was also these 2 who appeared to be the most anxious. In spite of this, Yun-yang had also confirmed from these 2 that although they were on good terms with the 9 missing people, it was still far from the friendship between the 9 of them. Disappearing mysteriously, Yun-yang's brows were tightly knitted together. One goes missing every day, but since the day before yesterday, no one has gone missing anymore. Chapter 120. Disappearances mostly happen to children or kidnappings and extortion of rich young masters and young ladies. But it rarely happened to adult men, especially these disabled soldiers who had nothing on them. They lived in extreme poverty and could barely maintain their food and clothing, even if they kidnapped and blackmailed. And even if the blackmail was successful, how much profit could they get? What was even more ridiculous was the fact that 9 people had been kidnapped consecutively for 9 days. What kind of logic was this? Yun-yang's train of thought stopped abruptly. A thought flashed through his mind as his face turned pale. 9 days. 9 people. Why 9 days? Why were there 9 people? Yun-yang suddenly thought of a horrifying possibility. He thought about it with difficulty and said, "Everyone go back first. If I'm not wrong, something like this shouldn't happen again." Chen-san asked, "Young master, what do you mean?" Yun-yang heaved a long sigh. "There's something more to this incident. It should be related to a sinister arcane skill that requires 9 people to activate. I think I know the cause and effect of this. Honestly, I hope that I'm wrong. Otherwise, the consequences will be dire." He took out a parcel from his robe and opened it with some difficulty. It was filled with glistening yellow gold, but Yun-yang had never realized that the gold's color was so blinding. He said softly, "I'll have to trouble all of you to help settle the 9 brothers' families. Send these gold ingots over on my behalf." Dozens of men knelt on the ground simultaneously. "Thank you, young master. On behalf of our missing brothers, we thank young master for your great kindness." Great kindness? Yun-yang chuckled bitterly, his face full of despair. Could a few gold ingots really buy the life of a hero who had sacrificed his life for the country and its people? If it was possible, I, Yun-yang, am willing to spend all my wealth to raid and plunder the world, to get as much gold as I can. However, he could not. How could these glistening gold ingots be equivalent to a hero's life? At most, they could only make up for his guilt. It was really just a token of his gratitude. Yun-yang walked out of the desolate alley, feeling the rage within him shoot straight to his very soul. He took out the 9 heavens dictum almost without hesitation. This time, Yun-yang used the real 9 heavens dictum. It was not the kind of token that the brothers used to have. This was the only token in the residence of 9 supremes. The token itself seemed to be surrounded by a faint purple light. Yun-yang thought about it, and took out his 7th brother Supreme Blood's token, pasting it on the 9 heavens dictum. Then, holding the orb of blood in his hand, he issued a direct command. Streaks of blood-like rays of light shot out from the 9 heavens dictum. Check. Have there been any disabled soldiers or soldiers in service who have gone missing? If they did, would they disappear for 9 consecutive days? 9 missing people? If there is such news, report it immediately without any delay. The blood-red light flashed and disappeared. On this very night, in countless places, countless people and countless secrets, all of them had tears streaming down their faces. Looking at the 9 heavens dictum that was shining with a pure blood-red light, countless people were overwhelmed with emotions. They were so excited that they could not speak. Supreme Blood Lord finally appeared again. This is the true 9 heavens command. Countless people leaped up and rushed up at an unprecedented speed to check the contents of the 9 heavens dictum. Immediately after. Immediately, everyone spread out and investigate. Go and investigate immediately. The faster the better. We must come up with the most detailed investigation results in the shortest time possible. Quick, quick, quick. Supreme Bloodlord's first command after his return. If we don't investigate thoroughly, we don't have to live to embarrass Supreme Bloodlord anymore. Quick. We must be quick. Everyone else is on the move. Our dictum of blood is the direct force of Supreme Bloodlord. If we fall behind the others, we can just commit suicide together. After Yin Yang returned, the Nine Heavens dictum was stuck to his chest. He could vaguely feel that there was a constant stream of news. From the messages, the agitation and anxiety of the messenger could be seen. Boss, you're back. Supreme Bloodlord, our boss, when will he be back? Supreme Bloodlord, our Water Lord. Supreme Bloodlord, our Lord Yin. Looking at the anxious and hopeful messages, Yin Yang could completely feel the anxiety, urgency, and cautiousness on the messenger's face. Faced with such news, Yin Yang felt like his heart was frying in oil, unable to deal with it. For a moment, he was in so much pain that his heart almost spasmed, unable to speak. Do your job well. Yin Yang replied in unison. Looking at the deep night sky, Yin Yang only wanted to roar at the top of his lungs and vent his frustration. However, after looking at it for a long time, he finally heaved a long drawn-out sigh. It was only the wee hours of the morning when the Nine Heavens dictum began to shine with news. Concentrated around Tiantang City's territory, there had been disappearances of battle-hardened soldiers since about a year and a half ago. There had been a total of 3 incidents where 9 people had disappeared each time. The first time was a year and a half ago. In the second month, 9 battle-hardened soldiers had gone missing in the west of Tiantang City. There was no news of them at all. The second time was after the 9th of the 3rd month last year. Starting from the 15th of the 3rd month, 9 battle-hardened soldiers had gone missing in the north of Tiantang City for 9 consecutive days. The third time was the current one, in the south of Tiantang City. The 3 disappearances had one thing in common. The 9 missing people were very close to each other. What each of them had in common was that they were veterans who had gone through hundreds of battles. Veterans who had taken at least 3 lives in their hands. It's because of the 9 Supremes indeed. It's the spectral path of the soul, the abyss path of the flesh. Yin Yang sucked in a deep breath and ordered once more. From today onwards, all forces are to focus on the east of Tiantang City. Once you discover the disappearance of the remaining soldiers, inform me immediately without delay. Once the order was given, Yin Yang fell silent. The Four Seasons Tower had actually used such an extremely vicious method. The spectral path of the soul, the abyss path of the flesh, was an extremely vicious and unorthodox method of locating that was not very effective. Only when one wanted to find a person but was unable to do so, or even had a rough grasp of the person's location, would they use this most extreme and inefficient method. The efficiency of this method was not high, but the conditions for its implementation were not low at all. Perhaps, it should be said that it was extremely harsh. The first condition was to find 9 people who were very close to each other, and these 9 people had to be extremely loyal to the person you were looking for. Secondly, these 9 people had to have a fighting soul. The so-called fighting soul was the soul of the battlefield. In other words, only people who had been on a proper battlefield and were fearless on the battlefield could possess such a fighting soul. Having a fighting soul alone was not enough. One had to have a murderous aura as well. A person who was extremely vicious would have a murderous aura. He would have a murderous aura when he raided, even when he slaughtered pigs and cows. However, the murderous aura on the battlefield was not the usual kind of murderous aura. It was a kind of murderous aura that had been accumulated through hundreds of battles. Killing one enemy would remove the anxiety and fear. Killing 2 enemies would make one fearless and increase one's bravery. Killing 3 enemies would make one invincible, and the murderous aura would rise. This meant that when some battle-hardened soldiers returned to their hometowns from the battlefield, they would sometimes smile and greet people. But it would make people feel that they were afraid to approach them, afraid to get close to them, a sense of fear that would grow in their hearts. This was the murderous aura. The murderous aura was real. It would only disappear after a long period of peace. Only when all the above conditions were met could the spectral path of the soul and the abyss path of flesh be activated. Perhaps it should be said that the so-called spectral path of the soul and the abyss path of flesh was to throw the souls of such people into the altar and search for the location of the person they were looking for using an extremely evil arcane method. This method was very mysterious, but it was evil to the extreme, and the efficiency was extremely low. Yin Yang had only heard of it in legends. Not only did he feel disdain towards such arcane methods, he even despised them. He had never thought that there would be a day when such an evil and heartless act would happen around him. And it was done to search for him. The love of life and death, the murderous army, the spectral path of the soul, the abyss path of flesh. The Four Seasons Tower. Yin Yang uttered the 3 words word by word. They were like the ice shards of an ancient iceberg, chilling to the bone. Emmy, I want to go into closed-door cultivation. Yin Yang was furious. Summon all the energy that you've been suppressing. I want to ascend to the 5th peak. Yin Yang could no longer care about stabilizing his realm or solid foundation. All he wanted was to become more powerful. As long as his cultivation base broke through to the 5th peak of mystical qi, he could ascend to the 4th stage of mystique wind conjuration, the 5th stage of fog of cloud conjuration, and the 4th stage of fiery charm. He could also cultivate supreme blood and supreme thunder's cultivation methods at the same time. By then his ability to maneuver would increase tremendously. He would be more confident and have more tricks up his sleeves when facing the Four Seasons Tower. It doesn't matter how you deal with me or the 9 Supremes. We'll just fight based on our own abilities. Yin Yang was furious. But why do you want to kill the veterans? They're the heroes of the country, the heroes of the people. They fought for the country, not forgetting to serve the country even when they're handicapped. Each of them is a man of steel. Each of them deserves to be ashamed for 3 lifetimes. Yet you're so insane as to kill such heroic men to achieve your goals. I'll do as you wish. When I appear before you, don't blame me for being merciless. Yin Yang's eyes glinted with a murderous glint. Perhaps the Four Seasons Tower did not expect that it was because of their extreme methods that Yin Yang would make such a crazy decision. Perhaps it was just like the saying, heaven is watching what man does. Karma and reincarnation had to be repaid. Chapter 121. It was autumn now. The autumn wind gradually turned chilly. After an autumn rain, it added a sense of desolation to the atmosphere. The autumn wind howled above Tiantang City, not stopping for the entire day. Almost every Yutong citizen, especially those who were once in the military, could not help but lift their heads to look when they heard the howling wind. Sometimes, the sound of the wind is the movement of our God of protectors, Supreme Wind, controlling the winds of the world. However, Tiantong's wind was howling all day long now. Where had the heroes of the past gone? 3 days later, early morning, above Tiantang City, the howling of the wind could be heard. The autumn wind had come again. Fallen leaves fluttered in the air. Dust and fog filled the air. The wind today seemed to be much stronger than usual. Yin Yang came out from his closed-door cultivation in the secret chamber. With a sway of his body, he turned into a gust of wind and soared into the sky soundlessly, merging with the howling autumn wind in the sky. The autumn wind began to feel strange at once. The spectral path of the soul, the abyss of the flesh, caused by the murderous aura, the resentment that surges to the heavens, the sinister wind, and the fog of the soul have their origins. Where the evil exists, heaven has eyes. Yin Yang knew. Any person or organization that used such an extreme method would definitely be forsaken by heaven and man, hated by both gods and ghosts. This itself was an act that went against the natural order. Similarly, Yin Yang, who understood the enemy's sinister tricks, only needed to observe where the murderous aura was. The place with the heaviest yin qi would be his target. The autumn wind suddenly spun, forming a tornado in the air. At that moment, the fallen leaves that were drifting in the air of Tiantang City suddenly spun once again. They formed a pillar of tornado in the air that connected the sky and the earth. Then, the tornado changed its direction continuously. Such a situation had happened frequently in the past. Therefore, to the people it was not strange at all. They all thought that it was just an ordinary weather phenomenon. The south of the city, as the tornado swept past, the falling leaves fluttered in the air like helpless butterflies. The south of the city was fine. It was a peaceful scene as far as the eye could see. There was no trace of murderous aura. Yun Yang continued to maintain the tornado as he headed towards the west of the city, since the Four Seasons Tower had done so and left the east side of the city untouched. It seemed like the most suspicious point should be the east side of the city. However, Yun Yang understood that the east side of the city was where most of the defeated soldiers gathered and where the poor gathered. It was difficult to find a place to set up the bizarre sacrificial ritual of spectral path of soul, abyss path of flesh. The deeper reason was that the places with the deepest resentment were usually the rich people's districts or the officials' districts. And the places with the deepest resentment were the imperial cities and the royal palaces. It was the same for every country. No matter how enlightened the monarch was, the palace was still the place where the most grievances were concentrated. There were not many wealthy people in the east side of Tiantang City. Most of them were gathered in the north, west, south, and center. The east side of the city had become the area with the least amount of resentment. When Yun Yang had soared into the sky with the tornado earlier, he had already roughly surveyed the locations. Other than the palace in the center that was filled with resentment, the south, west, and north were the strongest. The east side of the city, on the other hand, was peaceful. Now he only needed to comb through it slowly. Yun Yang was not in a hurry, combing through it bit by bit. It was an arduous task. After more than an hour, the tornado disappeared. The autumn wind was still howling, but it had turned into a gust of wind in the west side of the city. All the streets and alleys had turned into air vents. Strong winds whistled through every alley, every narrow street, and every main street. The wind did not subside for a whole day and night. When Yun Yang returned to the residence of Yin, his face was as pale as a sheet, like a ghost. He had only eaten a few mouthfuls of food, and he had almost fallen asleep. He was truly exhausted. After a short rest, Yun Yang entered the state of cultivation again. He had to persevere no matter how tired he was. Other than searching for the location of the murderous aura, his current mission was to cultivate. Only by greatly increasing his ability could he have the ability to handle the upcoming storm. In the middle of the night, the autumn wind blew again. For 3 consecutive days, the unprecedentedly violent autumn wind blew the streets of Tiantang City clean. Not even the dust could be seen. Why is it so strange this year? This autumn wind is endless. Yes, in the past, when the autumn wind blew during the day, it should have stopped at night, especially during the second half of the night. This year, however, the longer it gets, the more it sounds like a ghost wailing. It gives one goosebumps. That's right. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. It really is an evil wind. Among the crowd, a man with a cold expression did not join in the conversation. He only listened quietly, a hint of joy flashing in his eyes as he strode away. At a secret location, a few people sat in a circle with unusually solemn expressions, while a few others were walking over quickly. Brothers, perhaps it's good news. What good news? The autumn wind has been blowing continuously these days. It's very uncanny. Don't you all think it's odd? Autumn wind. Do you mean? This autumn wind looks normal, but if you look at the past few years, it might not be very normal. The burly man who spoke had an excited expression on his face as he lowered his voice. We all know that Lord Blood appeared a few days ago and issued an order. Actually, didn't Lord Wind and Lord Fire help in the previous battle? Although it's said that it was the spirits of the 2 lords who had manifested to help, I, Chi Laolu, don't believe it. And the autumn wind is so strange now. The man called Chi Laolu seemed to be choked as tears welled up in his eyes. Could it be? Our Lord Wind is making a move? When everyone heard this, their faces suddenly shook, and their eyes revealed expressions of surprise and joy. Calm down. The leader of the men looked calm as he hollered with a frown. Why are you all so agitated? What we need now is patience, absolute patience. Wait slowly. All of you be patient. Do you still remember what the 9 lords said? The 9 heavens dictum will always exist. You're only starting to doubt now. the burly and steady man's voice couldn't help but tremble. His eyes were also sparkling, and his lips were trembling. However, he pretended to be calm and laughed loudly. I have never believed that the 9 lords would die. Everyone do your jobs. Everyone, do your jobs well. The steady man's gaze was cold. If anyone makes a mistake and loses face for the lords, don't blame me, Boss Zhao, for saying something unpleasant. What do you mean by saying something unpleasant? Everyone laughed together. If anyone makes a mistake, everyone will swarm up and beat him to death. Boss Zhao snorted and said, why is the 9 heavens dictum not in a mess when the 9 lords are missing? Because everyone believes that the 9 lords will definitely come back. Therefore, the more the bosses are not around, the more the people in the 9 halls have to compete with each other. They are all preparing their troops and all of them are doing proper things. We must not lose face for Master Feng. Most importantly, we must keep our mouths shut, act fast, and be secretive. Boss Zhao's gaze was as sharp as a knife. The 9 lords are unprecedented heroes. We must not lose this reputation. Yes. Everyone dismiss. Boss Zhao stood up. Go back and keep an eye on your little bastards. If any of you make a mistake, even if we can't see it, we won't beat you to death. But ask your own conscience. Can you live with it? Do you have no face to live? The same conversation appeared in many secret places one after another. Now that Lord Shui has appeared, and now that the autumn wind is bewitching, I suspect that Lord Wind has also reappeared. Why is there still no news of our boss? But the more it is like this, the more we need to be stable. If anyone makes Lord Wind lose face, I don't need to say it, everyone understands. Both Lord Wind and Lord Flame had fought at Tianxian Cliff, and now Lord Shui has reappeared. There has been no movement for such a long time, but now he has made such a big move. There must be a mastermind behind this. Our Lord Yun is known as the soul of the 9 supremes. He has always been a strategist. This method of deceiving the world and playing everyone in the palm of his hand is Lord Yun's doing. It's not that I'm arrogant, but other than our Lord Yun, even if the other bosses were to plan it themselves, they would never be able to do it. Our Cloud School must not be outdone by the other families. Stay stable, work hard. Lord Yun will be back. The residence of Marshall. Is it really Lord Wind who has returned? Old Marshal Chiu paced back and forth while the old woman watched as this old man had already walked dozens of miles in his own yard. Old Marshal, His Majesty has summoned you. I'll go right away. The old marshal did not even have time to change his clothes. He simply put on a large cloak and left the house on his horse. Yun Yang continued to search and filter. Finally, he had chosen 11 locations, all of which he thought were the most likely targets. The palace was the first to bear the brunt, as the air of resentment was the heaviest. It could be said to be the best place to perform the demonic spell. The second place was the execution ground, the place where the most wanted criminals were executed. This was the place where most people died in Tiantang City, and it was also the best place to perform the demonic spell. However, what surprised Yun Yang was that the 3rd, 4th, and 5th places were the Crown Prince's residence, the 3rd Prince's residence, and the 4th Prince's residence. Among the princes of this dynasty, other than the few who had yet to grow up, the residences of those who had grown up had the heaviest air of resentment. Even the lowest ranked one was ranked 9th. Chapter 122. Yun Yang was a little dumbfounded by the outcome. What did these fellows do on a regular basis? There were 4 other places. The residence of the Grand Tutor, the residence of the Northern King, the residence of the Grand Commandant, and the residence of King Jing. Yun Yang committed them to memory. Out of these 11 places, one of them had to be the target. However, the more he was certain of it, the more furious Yun Yang became. The 11 suspects that he had identified were all people of high status and power. They were either members of the royal family, or the families of the ministers, who had the power to overturn the world. Thinking of this, Yun Yang could not help but feel a deep sense of sorrow. All of you are in high positions, living in luxury, taking whatever you want. Don't you know that the wealth, status, comfort, and enjoyment you have are all exchanged with the lives of the warriors who have fought outside? Just when all of you are enjoying all of this with a clear conscience, there are still people who have colluded with the Four Seasons Tower to kill meritorious officials. They are truly heartless and insane. Sometimes, Yun Yang even felt that he could not understand why such an act and such a thing would happen. Are you not Yutong's people? Furthermore, are you even human? How could a person be so shameless to this extent? Charge for the fifth peak tonight. Yun Yang gritted his teeth with a strong sense of resentment. Charge for the fifth stage of Fog of Cloud Conjuration and the fourth stage of Mystique Wind Conjuration. Tomorrow, I must find out who the culprit is. If it's really any one of these 9 people, I will destroy this person at all costs. Yun Yang did not suspect His Majesty, not at all. Out of everyone here, the one who had the least reason to do so was His Majesty the Emperor. However, his son might not be so. Spiritual qi surged in from all directions. For 3 consecutive days, Yun Yang had not completed his breakthrough. Emmy controlled the output of the qi of vitality precisely, allowing Yun Yang to stay on the edge of the breakthrough. However, he was just a little short, unable to break through. As for Yun Yang, he had transformed into the wind for the past few days, squeezing his mystical qi to the limit every day to ensure that his mystical qi had been depleted to its limit before he returned. Therefore, he was as tired as a dead dog when he returned, unable to even stand properly. In spite of this, Yun Yang felt that he had improved tremendously each time he recovered from the extreme exhaustion. Under such extreme exhaustion and extreme training that kept him on the edge of a breakthrough, Yun Yang's cultivation base was further stabilized and strengthened. However, Yun Yang did not want to drag it out any longer. Forceful breakthrough. Emmy was helpless as well. According to Emmy's opinion, it would take at least another day to maintain the extreme exhaustion and the training on the edge of a breakthrough. It would be more appropriate to ensure that it could recover its energy 5 to 6 times at the very least. However, as its owner, Yun Yang had spoken. Emmy could only do as he was told. Other than the surging mystical energy that gathered from the sky, there was also an even purer and surging spiritual energy that surged out from the green vines. Yun Yang could only feel the quaking barrier of the fifth peak crumbling almost instantaneously. Countless stars appeared before his eyes, as if a universe had suddenly exploded in his mind. Although his eyes were closed, he could still feel the heaven and earth collapsing abruptly, followed by a sea of vibrant colors. That feeling, Yun Yang suddenly felt that his horizons had been broadened. It was as if some things had been right before his eyes, but he had turned a blind eye to them, unable to notice them no matter what. It was only after breaking through the current level that he realized that he had neglected so much. It was an exceptionally wonderful feeling. Once he thought about it, Yun Yang could not help recalling what Supreme Earth, who had the highest cultivation base among his brothers, had once said. Only when one breaks through the fifth peak and sees the fifth heaven can he feel that he's actually just a frog at the bottom of a well. Before breaking through to the fifth heaven, he won't even have the self-awareness to know that he's a frog at the bottom of a well. When Yun Yang had heard this, he had only smiled, wondering if his boss was exaggerating a little too much. However, it was only today that he understood it after experiencing it for himself. This sentence was the truth. Some of them were even incomplete. Fifth peak. Yun Yang had only experienced the novelty for less than a quarter of an hour before he began to meditate again. Fog of Cloud Conjuration, Mystique Wind Conjuration, Fiery Charm. He began to cultivate. Yun Yang was racing against time. He had to elevate his cultivation base, ability, and mystical skill in the shortest amount of time possible. He had to charge forward courageously. Cultivation, other than being his true asset to protect himself, was also. Yun Yang felt that he could be closer to his brothers in the cultivation atmosphere. And he could feel the closeness when they were still together. The breakthrough of the Fog of Cloud Conjuration was a natural process for Yun Yang. The breakthrough of the Mystique Wind Conjuration was not that difficult either. When his cultivation base had reached the required level, he would naturally break through. However, the progress of the Fiery Charm's cultivation was entirely different from the other two. Even when his cultivation base was sufficient, it would still take a considerable amount of time to break through to the original level. Up until midnight, the fiery charm still had not broken through to the fourth stage. However, Yun Yang was already very satisfied with his current progress. Now that his cultivation base had reached the fifth peak, he could already be considered an expert. Well, comparatively speaking, that was indeed the case. The fifth peak of mystical chi was the beginning of the fifth heaven. The fifth stage of fog of cloud conjuration was the beginning. The fourth stage of mystique wind conjuration was the same level as supreme wind back then. This level was enough. It was enough to deal with the current situation. Yun Yang, whose cultivation base and ability had improved tremendously, floated out gleefully. The residence of Crown Prince. The Crown Prince was still fuming over the disappearance of Shui Yuehan. After Shui Yuehan's disappearance, the four noble families of spring, summer, autumn, and winter had been coming to pick a fight. His Highness, who was already under house arrest, was not in a good mood. He had been pressured time and time again, yet he had no choice but to speak nicely to them. Naturally, his mood had worsened, and he was already feeling extremely aggrieved. This Shui Yuehan, I don't understand. How could such a smart person do such a stupid thing? Thinking about it now, His Highness was infuriated. He would have been fine by daybreak, but he broke out of the prison and escaped before daybreak. Did he really need half a night's time? His Highness's handsome face was filled with conflict and anger. Isn't this just looking for trouble? Your Highness. A white-haired, kind-looking elder beside the Crown Prince mused for a moment before speaking softly. This old and useless one has a different opinion on this matter. Crown Prince. Ha! It's been some time since the incident. The elder spoke slowly. If Shui Yuehan wasn't dead, he should have informed us, but he didn't. We would never betray him, nor would we simply hand him over. Shui Yuehan has always been loyal to the Crown Prince's residence for so many years, and he's quite intelligent as well. There's really no reason for him to do such a thing. The white-bearded elder said faintly. Therefore, this old and useless one thinks that Shui Yuehan is most likely dead. He was already dead before the news of the prison break spread. The one who created the illusion of a prison break was someone else. And that Fu Guansan should be dead as well. All of this is a ploy by someone with ulterior motives. The white-bearded elder looked mournful as he said. Otherwise, there's no way to explain everything. Taking a step back, even if Shui Yuehan really did break out of the prison, there's no need for him to ambush those popinjays. That would be the real problem of creating new problems. If he really wanted to flee for his life, why would he offend the spring, summer, and winter families? You must know that attacking the three of them at that moment was equivalent to sowing irreconcilable enmity with the three families. The so-called mercy was just a smokescreen. If one were to think deeper, it would not be difficult to understand. No, it was a ploy to further deepen the enmity between Shui Yuehan and the popinjays, completely crushing the enmity between both parties. The Crown Prince's face gradually turned pale. Dead. Are there no other possibilities? The white-bearded elder said confidently. It's most likely so. Shui Yuehan and Han Wufei were sworn brothers. They were so close that it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they'd gone through life and death together. Both of them had roamed the martial world for many years before coming to serve under your highness. If Shui Yuehan wasn't dead, he would have told Han Wufei, even if he was hesitant to tell us. On the side, the handsome Han Wufei wore a sorrowful expression. Brother Shui must have been murdered. Your Highness, please help Brother Shui. You can't let him die unjustly and bear this inexplicable stain. That's a huge crime for a prison break. The Crown Prince sat down slowly and said, if Shui Yuehan really died in the Board of Punishments, then who was the one who did it? The white-bearded elder sat in silence, his eyes looking at the other strategists. However, the others did not say anything. Instead, they all stared at him. There was only one meaning in their words. Continue speaking. This old man will just say it to get the ball rolling. Please add on later. The white-bearded elder smiled helplessly and said, as for who killed Shui Yuehan and Fu Guansan, this old man thinks that there are only a few targets on the surface. The group perked up when they heard the elder. The third prince's side is undoubtedly the most suspicious. Shui Yuehan was an important person in the crown prince's residence. His death would definitely be a huge blow to the residence's strength. Moreover, after this matter, the crown prince will be in conflict with the Ministry of Justice and will form enmity with the spring, autumn, and winter clans. He will make many strong enemies for no reason, while the third prince's side will not be exposed at all. He will perfectly stay out of this matter. Of course, the fourth prince, the fifth prince, and the sixth prince might have done the same. The reason why the third prince is the most suspicious is that he's currently favored by the emperor. Once His Highness the Crown Prince loses power, he'll benefit the most. Apart from the princes, there are also the people from the four great clans. Even the two old marshals of the military are suspects. Perhaps I should put it this way. As long as it's a person or force that benefits from this incident, they're all suspects. The only difference is how suspicious they are, and how much they can benefit from it. Only the Ministry of Penalty, which is at the center of the whirlpool in this case, and is also under great pressure right now, is the least suspicious. Chapter 123. As he spoke, the crowd nodded in agreement, deep in thought. However, other than the people on the surface, I have another suspicion. The white-bearded elder paused for a moment before saying faintly, I suspect that this could be the doing of the 9 Supremes. 9 Supremes? Everyone was stunned at the same time. The crown prince's expression changed as well as he asked hurriedly, Why do you say so? There was a hint of hesitation on the white-bearded elder's face as he said, This old and useless one is only guessing. There's no evidence to speak of. Therefore, it's only a guess. The crown prince's expression sank slowly, his gaze flickering with a complicated and indecipherable meaning. After a while, the crown prince suddenly said in a low voice, If the 9 Supremes' forces are really involved, why would they be involved in this? There must be a reason. Also, what benefits can they gain from this? No one could answer the crown prince's question. If they were to continue thinking about it, the consequences would be too horrifying. The final extension of this theory did not mean that the 9 Supremes were targeting the crown prince. Let's put this theory aside for now. After all, there's no evidence or sign that the 9 Supremes are really involved in this matter, the crown prince murmured, as if trying to console himself. The white-bearded elder said with a smile while stroking his beard, It's good to put it aside for now. After all, this is just this old and useless one's feeling. I don't have any evidence myself. In terms of suspicion and related benefits, the 9 Supremes are indeed the least suspicious. However, the more he said so, the more anxious the crown prince felt. Had the 9 Supremes really made a move? The 9 Supremes never seemed to focus on benefits when they did things. The so-called least suspicious was meaningless. Similar secret conversations took place almost every day in the residences of the princes. All sorts of guesses were made, but it was still difficult to come to a conclusion. After all, how could there be truth without concrete evidence? However, for some reason, all the discussions would stop when they reached the level of the 9 Supremes. Silence reigned. A gust of autumn wind blew in the sky. Yin Yang had searched every corner of the 10 targets, but he still could not find any trace of them. He was not discouraged, instead he became more serious. It would be strange if he could find out the Four Seasons Tower's meticulous setup so easily. To deal with the Four Seasons Tower, patience was required. Just as he was about to return to the residence of Yin, after completing his search for the day, suddenly, he felt something. An abnormally powerful aura seemed to appear behind him on his right, but it disappeared in a flash. Yin Yang immediately felt that something was amiss. Instinctively, he moved towards the direction of the breeze. Autumn was high and the clouds were light. The autumn wind blew. The government's meeting for the day had ended. The white-bearded old man staggered out of the room. Han Wufei followed behind him. I'll send Old He back, and also to thank Old He for speaking up for my brother's sake and generosity tonight. Elder He chuckled and said in a doddering manner, Then I'll have to trouble you, Lord Han. This old man is indeed a little tired. I can also chat with Lord Han along the way. The atmosphere in the conference hall is a bit heavy after all. Hearing their words, the crown prince dispelled the idea of having someone escort them. He then said, "If that's the case, I wish the two of you a safe journey. Have a good night." In reality, the crown prince was exhausted as well, but he had to maintain his courteous demeanor. Seeing that everyone had left, he subconsciously yawned and went back to rest. Both Old He and Han Wufei walked out of the residence of Crown Prince and walked slowly along the street in silence. Under the starlight, the age spots on Old He's face could be seen clearly. His legs seemed to be trembling as he walked. He had one foot in the grave, it was obvious. After a long time, when they arrived in front of the Old He's door, Han Wufei finally spoke in a low voice. "Old He, isn't it too early to bring up the topic of the 9 Supremes now?" Old He's gaze glinted as he replied faintly, "Han Wufei." The 3 words were uttered with a pause. The old man exuded an imposing aura. Although it was fleeting, the domineering aura made Han Wufei break out in cold sweat and shiver. It was the sudden appearance of this powerful aura that alerted Yin Yang, who was in the air. Yes, it is this subordinate's fault. However, this subordinate still thinks that if we bring up this matter to the Crown Prince now, the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. We don't have proof after all. Han Wufei explained hurriedly. If we're not careful, we might alert the enemy instead. The gentle autumn breeze blew across the sky, leaving no trace as it passed. The white-bearded elder said faintly, "You don't have to worry about this, I have." Halfway through his words, Old He suddenly paused. A massive aura like an erupting volcano rose abruptly as he lifted his head and hollered, "Come down!" 2 words. It was like 2 claps of thunder in the clear sky. His bony palm flipped and struck towards the sky. Countless sharp gusts of wind swept out, instantly forming layers of sharp forces that looked like an inescapable net, suddenly flying towards the sky. Not only was Old He's attack ferocious, the range of his attack was even wider, enveloping an area of over 30 meters. With a hum, even the autumn wind in the sky seemed to have been dispersed by the palm. An extremely deep and sinister black hole had appeared in the sky at the moment of his attack. It was as if it could devour everything in this world. The extreme eeriness and terror was spreading from the black hole. The autumn wind was extinguished, but it was still there, barely discernible in the sky. The cool autumn air was still refreshing. No matter how strong a man was, how could he extinguish the wind of nature? Old He stood in front of the door for a full quarter of an hour, with an unprecedentedly serious expression. His ears were constantly paying attention to the movements in the air. After a long time, a suspicious look appeared in his eyes. He snorted and said, "Isn't it?" When Old He made his move, Han Wufei had swiftly taken 3 steps back as well. His entire body was like an arrow on a bowstring, ready to shoot out at any time and attack with all his might. At the same time, when Old He retracted his aura, Han Wufei came over again and asked in a low voice, "Old He, did you find anything?" Old He frowned, his gaze still roaming the sky as he said softly, "It's strange. I felt that there was an unusual change in the sound of the wind just now. There was even a subtle feeling of being watched. To be safe, I immediately made my move to test it out, but I didn't find anything out of the ordinary." Han Wufei's heart skipped a beat, his voice even softer as he said, "Old He, do you mean Supreme Wind?" The word was so soft that it was almost inaudible. To be able to spy on someone at such a close distance without leaving any trace, it could only be Supreme Wind's secret art of wind. Old He frowned and kept quiet for a while, his expression growing darker as he said, "If Supreme Wind isn't dead, then it wasn't an illusion that I sensed just now." Han Wufei's expression changed. Never underestimate the power of their special technique. Old He's face was solemn. "In the future, you must be more careful in everything you do. Think about what you say and do before you act. If you can't act, then don't act. Do you understand? Unless there's a day when it's absolutely safe." Old He's eyes that seemed to be blurry from old age were now dark and deep, like the evil black hole that had appeared earlier. "Yes. In the future, no matter where you are, don't mention these words if you don't have to," Old He warned again. "Yes." Old He still did not enter, standing at the door with his arms behind his back, deep in thought with a frown. His eyes would look up at the sky from time to time, as if waiting for something. After a long time, When even Han Wufei felt tired from standing, old he finally said, "It seems like we should go back." With a flick of his sleeves, he turned and entered the residence. Only then did Han Wufei feel as if he had been pardoned. He bowed with cupped hands and turned to leave quickly. After walking another few feet, he activated his movement skill and disappeared at the end of the road like a wisp of green smoke. The sound of the wind was still soft, as if it could blow endlessly in the air. After a long while, old He's frail body appeared at the door again, looking up without moving for a long time. After a long time, only when dawn broke in the east and a sliver of white appeared on the horizon, did old He finally turn around and slowly walk back into the mansion. He was still muttering to himself, or rather, he was talking to someone. "Lord Supreme Wind, if you're not dead, this old man will burn incense to thank the heavens. Yutong is in danger, and the other countries of the continent are eyeing us. We really can't do without the 9 sirs." His voice was sincere. It was like an old man with one foot in the grave was praying sincerely to the heavens, making his most cherished wish. The sky was slowly brightening. Feng Mafei and Lao Mei were cultivating diligently in the residence, concentrating on improving themselves. Suddenly, a loud thud could be heard as a person fell from the sky. Feng Mafei was shocked, rushing forward like a flash of lightning to catch the person who had fallen. The person was dressed in purple robes. It was none other than Yun Yang. However, Yun Yang's face was pale as a sheet, his breaths coming in and out of breath. He looked like he could breathe his last at any time. Even his pupils were dilated. After seeing Feng Mafei's face clearly, Yun Yang finally heaved a sigh of relief. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and spat out 7 to 8 mouthfuls of blood. Chapter 124. Lao Mei, come quick! Feng Mafei was frightened out of his wits and almost lost his soul. Lao Mei was burning with anxiety as well, flying over in haste. He almost fainted with a single glance, pacing around in panic. "Send young master to his room first and settle him down carefully. I'll go look for the medicinal pills. Remember to stabilize young master's heart meridian with mystical qi. It has to be stabilized no matter what. Medicinal pills. Where the F*ck did I put them? Oh right. Use your mystical qi to check if there's any blood that hasn't been spat out. If there is, try to force it out. If there isn't, you can." Lao Mei ran away as he spoke, crashing into his room with a loud thud. A loud rumbling could be heard. It was fortunate that he was able to say so many things in one go without pausing for even a moment. Feng Mafei, on the other hand, almost suffocated from listening to him. His mental fortitude had improved tremendously during this period of time. He managed to maintain his composure and sent Yun Yang back to his room to bed. When Yun Yang woke up again, he felt like his bones had been broken into pieces while his brain felt like it was being pierced by hundreds of millions of steel needles at the same time. The extreme pain that pierced through one's heart and didn't stop at all caused one to feel like living was worse than death, and it was so painful that one wished to live. Even his divine sense and soul seemed to have been sliced into a million pieces. Even when he woke up, he was still dizzy and couldn't think of anything. He was like an idiot, and everything he saw was like a cloud in the clouds. It was only when night fell that the situation improved slightly. His brain still felt like it was being pierced by tens of thousands of steel needles. Even his eyelids did not feel like they belonged to him. He could not even blink, let alone move a finger. Yun Yang was still groggy. The only feeling he had was that he seemed to have drunk something, and someone had forced his mouth open and stuffed some kind of medicinal pill into it. Then, Yun Yang fell into a deep slumber. He had used up all his energy to wake up, but he still could not open his eyelids. Yun Yang, who was groggy, could only feel his soul drifting in the clouds. In front of him, there seemed to be a bright path ahead, and he unconsciously walked towards it. There seemed to be a few people walking forward, chatting and laughing. Yun Yang recognized it at once. The figures were all tall and slender, and they walked as if they were taking a stroll in the park. They were indescribably carefree and at ease. Big brother, second brother, fourth brother. Once the thought entered his mind, Yun Yang was so agitated that his chest was about to explode. He chased after her with quick steps. The few of them turned around at the same time. Their handsome faces were filled with bewilderment. Old Ninth, why are you here? Yin Yang was so happy that he was almost in tears. That's great. I thought I'd never see all of you again. These people before him did not wear the 9 Supremes' masks, but Yin Yang did not find them unfamiliar. He could accurately determine who was Supreme Earth, who was Supreme Water, and who was... That familiarity was as if they had known each other for tens of thousands of years. It was a kind of kindness and trust that came from the heart and melted into the bones. Where are 8th brother and the rest? Yin Yang asked happily. Supreme Earth, who was the leader, frowned and looked at Yin Yang. Well, 9th, why are you here? Why am I here? Yin Yang was confused. Can't I be here? Suddenly he recalled. I already know who killed us. I also know. Supreme Earth's eyes widened. You know, you've gone to take revenge? Yin Yang stammered. The brothers chided him jokingly. Since the vengeance hasn't been avenged and the country is still surrounded by enemies from all sides, you're the only pillar left. How dare you come here? What are you trying to do? The few of them kicked him at the same time. Supreme Earth hollered, Go back. Don't ever come back. Yin Yang could only feel himself being kicked into the air and hurriedly flying back. The scene before his eyes changed rapidly. Supreme Earth and the others, who were initially in sight, were shrouded in a layer of fog. I'm not going back. I'm not going back. Yin Yang cried out. I'm not going back. Why must you all leave me behind? I have nothing, and you all still leave me behind. I don't want to be separated from all of you. Yin Yang, who was filled with anxiety, opened his eyes abruptly. The moment he woke up, he suddenly felt a boundless pain. It was like a tide, wave after wave attacking him. He couldn't help but let out a muffled groan. His entire body was instantly covered in sweat. Boss, boss, a dreamy voice called beside his ear. Yin Yang struggled for a long time, before he could barely make out a blurry silhouette in front of him, looking back at him. Another half a day later, he finally recognized the owner of this face with much difficulty. It was Dong Tianling. Yin Yang endured the excruciating pain in his head and forced the muscles on his face to smile. Then he closed his eyes again. Despite the pain, he had finally woken up. His mind was clear, no longer hazy. However, the agony was even more intense after he woke up. It was not just physical pain. Rather, the agony that originated from the bottom of his heart pierced through his soul and was much more excruciating than physical pain. The faces of Supreme Earth and the others were still in front of him. The laughter and curses seemed to still echo in his ears. Yin Yang could still feel the clear sensation in his abdomen from that loving kick. Go back. Never come back. Yin Yang turned his head away. He shut his eyes tightly. A voice came from beside him. Boss, you're finally awake. These 3 days have been so dangerous. I'm so tired. It was Dong Tianling's voice. You've entered the gates of hell, haven't you? What happened? Why did you suddenly get such a serious illness? Fang Mafei's voice was heard. We don't know either. We heard young master's loud cry that day and this happened. Something must have gone wrong in his cultivation. I've already fed him the few healing pills I brought with me. Dong Tianling's voice sounded relieved. If it still doesn't work, I have no other choice. Thank you, young Master Dong, for lending a helping hand. Don't say that, this is my boss. You don't understand the bond between us brothers. Forget a few pills, even if boss wanted my wife. Cough, cough. No matter how tired Yin Yang was, the corners of his lips could not help twitching. This be *tch. Then he fainted again. What was different from before was that the endless divine art in his body had finally begun to circulate on its own to repair itself. When Yin Yang woke up again, it was already nighttime. The lamp was as lonely as a pea. Under the boundless night sky, there was a sense of desolation and desolation. His embrace was warm. The 3 eclipse panthers and the lightning cat were curled up in his embrace obediently, desperately trying to transfer the warmth from their tiny bodies to him. When Yin Yang woke up, the first thing he noticed was a small, soft paw carefully prodding at his eyelids. When Yin Yang opened his eyes abruptly, the tiny paw was obviously startled and instinctively scratched at his eyelids. Luckily, It stopped in time, and stopped right in front of Yun Yang. It had almost disfigured his face. Then a joyful meow rang out. 4 snow-white little heads craned their necks to look over at the same time. Making sure that Yun Yang had really opened his eyes, they meowed in unison again. The 4 little fellows leaped up in unison with a swoosh and spun in the air. Their large tails swished wildly, their joy evident in every aspect as if they were about to explode. One of them even let out another meow and shot out like an arrow. He then saw Feng Mafei being dragged by the hair by the eclipse panther that had left. He begged for mercy as he walked. "Little ancestor, I'm here now. Stop pulling. Stop pulling. I dropped it. Young master, are you awake?" Yun Yang blinked with a smile. Yun Yang could clearly feel that his condition was improving. The pain all over his body had been reduced by half. Although it was still excruciating, it was not to the extent that he needed to avoid fainting. There was also the endless divine art circulating within his body. His dantian had begun to breathe automatically as well. Yun Yang could also feel that Emi in his deific consciousness space was unprecedentedly exhausted. It retracted its vines at an extremely slow pace and curled into a ball, its leaves drooping as it began to absorb the energy within the space to nourish itself. It could be seen that Emi was the biggest contributor for him to be able to pull through this ordeal. However, Emi was already exhausted, and its energy was greatly damaged. Feng Mafei helped Yun Yang up and carefully passed him a bowl of medicinal ointment. "This is the 500-year-old Lingji mushroom that Qiu Yunsan sent over this morning. It's brewed together with the imperial spirit liquid that Chun Wanfeng brought. Young master, drink it quickly. Replenishing your energy is the key now." Yun Yang swallowed it in small mouthfuls. Once the medicinal ointment entered his stomach, he felt a surge of spiritual energy rushing to his limbs and bones. The droplets of inner energy in his dantian increased accordingly. Slowly, the numbness that filled his limbs faded away as well. He felt energized at once. Closing his eyes, he said softly, "This bowl of medicinal ointment is extraordinary. I'm fine now." Even his speech was much clearer now. Feng Mafei was overjoyed and said, that's great. I'll go inform Lao Mei now. This fellow has been torturing himself to death these few days." He then left hurriedly. Yun Yang lay quietly with his eyes closed, but his heart was not at peace. This time, due to his sudden injury, he owed a lot of favors. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, these 4 fellows must have taken out their best treasures. As the saying went, one could see the general trend from a small clue. The 500-year-old Lingji mushroom and imperial spirit liquid were already extremely unusual. The 500-year-old Lingji mushroom was still easy to come by, but the Lingji mushroom, even a 100-year-old one would be considered a rare treasure, let alone a 500-year-old one. As for the imperial spirit liquid, it was an even better medicine. As for the medicinal pills that Dong Tianling had given earlier, these must have been given to these 4 people by the 4 noble families to protect their lives during critical moments. Chapter 125. Yun Yang sucked in a breath and began to manipulate the power of the endless divine art in his body. Half a quarter of an hour later, when Lao Mei came over, he saw that Yun Yang had already entered the state of inner reflection. Layers of mist slowly rose from his body. Lao Mei was an expert in cultivation. Knowing that he could not be disturbed, he heaved a sigh of relief and slowly retreated out of the door. Silently, he walked to the door and sat down. The 4 little fellows were also very tactful and did not try to take advantage of the situation. Instead, each of them chose a window and squatted there. The last one, with a swoosh, climbed onto the roof and slowly squatted there. His 8 little ears straightened up at the same time. His 8 little eyes were rolling around, and he was extremely vigilant. The moon hung high in the sky. Yin Yang woke up again and sat up. He tried to stretch out his legs to get off the bed, but he felt that his legs were weak, and it was difficult to continue. After trying a few more times, he finally stood up with the support of the bed. After moving around for a while, he felt that his feet were firmly planted on the ground. He increased the amount of movement, and the bones in his body made a series of kacha-kacha sounds, like beans being fried. Young master is finally fine. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei were full of smiles. You guys have worked hard this time. Yin Yang smiled softly and said seriously, to be able to serve young master is a blessing that we can't even ask for in 8 lifetimes. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei said respectfully, a little hardship is nothing. Fang Mafei hesitated for a moment before he finally asked carefully, young master, this time, what exactly is going on? Yin Yang sighed softly. It had been a narrow escape from death this time. To be more precise, it had been a narrow escape from death. The danger of this incident was even greater than what had happened at Tianxian Cliff. The moment the elder lifted his head, Yin Yang's beer sensed that he had been locked onto. At that very moment, the wind that Yin Yang had transformed into rose 500 feet into the air. Then, he saw the old man raise his hand, and an unprecedented attack filled with a destructive feeling suddenly surrounded him. If it wasn't for the fact that he saw the opportunity in time, and pulled the distance between them a lot, even if he had 10 more lives, even if he transformed into clouds and wind, he would not be able to avoid the road to the underworld. Even Yin Yang could not help but shudder at the thought of the terror that had gripped him in that instant. Too powerful. It was too terrifying. There was simply no room for resistance. Until now, Yin Yang still did not understand how he, who had turned into the autumn wind and wandered in the sky, had been discovered. It was probably because his current cultivation level was not high enough, and he did not understand the realms of those high-level cultivators and the reactions they could make. In short, under that strike, he had almost disintegrated on the spot. If it wasn't for the fact that he had just broken through, and his Mystique Wind Conjuration cultivation base had reached the 4th stage, if it wasn't for Emmy's timely support that allowed Yin Yang to maintain the form of the wind, he would have really died. It would have been a death that would have destroyed his cultivation base, his soul, and his body. He would have been as dead as he could be. After the attack, Yin Yang, who was severely injured, wanted to leave immediately and run far away. However, he knew that the elder would not let him go just like that. So he persevered, maintaining the form of the wind and continuing to wander in the air. Indeed, this terrifying elder had been testing him for an entire night. In the end, Yin Yang's energy was completely depleted, and it was Emmy's support that he managed to hold on until he returned home. If there had been the slightest mistake in this process, it would have been difficult for him to escape the fate of disintegrating and losing his soul. Before this, it was not that Yin Yang did not know about this elder in the residence of Crown Prince, but he had only thought of him as an old scholar and a strategist. At most, he had some life experience and wisdom. That was all. Looking at the age spots on his face, and the fact that he could barely walk, Yin Yang had a feeling that this old man did not have many years left to live. In the end, when he attacked, it was actually such an earth-shattering presence. When the elder finally gave up at dawn, retracting his aura and returning to the yard, Yin Yang could already feel that he could not hold on any longer. Even then, the elder had actually said something to deceive Yin Yang, something that was extremely bewitching. How distrustful was he, and how confident was he? Yin Yang had a judgment about the elder. This elder was definitely not a 5th peak, 6th peak, or 7th peak practitioner. Even Marquis Yin and Old Dugu, who had been waiting for the brothers in the small house, had not given him such a terrifying feeling. This person was definitely an existence that had surpassed 10th perfection. He was completely unprepared and completely unprepared. The attack, which caught Yin Yang off guard, had almost killed him, his soul shattered, and he would never be able to recover. How could he deal with such a terrifying person? There was no way he could fight him now. Even if he had 1,000 tricks up his sleeves, it would be useless against such absolute power. Yin Yang frowned deeply. There were 2 enemies in Tiantang City now that he could not deal with them with his current ability. One was Mi Kongchuan in the palace. The other was Old He. How could he kill them? How many days have I been unconscious? Yin Yang asked weakly. Including today, it has been 4 days and 4 nights. Fang Mafei's eyes were still filled with lingering fear. When he had seen Yin Yang fall from the sky, he had been scared out of his wits. Has it been 4 days? Yin Yang heaved a soft sigh of relief and said, did anything major happen in these 4 days and 4 nights? I haven't heard of anything major happening in the outside world. Maybe we didn't go out much. Lao Mei said. However, the 4 young masters of spring, summer, autumn, and winter would come a few times a day. They also brought a lot of spiritual medicine with them. Yin Yang nodded. Even if they had ulterior motives for helping in times of crisis, they had to be remembered. Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan came again. Lao Mei grinned. But it's different this time. He came in a rage, and was dumbfounded when he saw your condition. Then he left. Then he sent some medicine over. Yin Yang perked up immediately. This old man came again? Old man Feng Mafei and Lao Mei looked at each other. In this world, this man before them was probably the only one who dared to call old Marshal Qiu this way. Somehow, both of them would have criticized him if they had known that Yin Yang was Supreme Cloud. Now, however, they could only criticize him silently. Now that Yin Yang's tone was smooth, and he had even begun to joke, his body should be fine. It was comforting to both of them that their hearts that had been hanging in suspense could finally be at ease. What they did not know was that Yin Yang's injury this time was far more serious than they had imagined. It was easier said than done to fully recover. Another 2 days had passed, but Yin Yang still felt weak all over. Although his condition continued to improve, and the speed of improvement was enough to make those who knew about it widen their eyes in shock. How could Yin Yang be satisfied? The news from the 9 Heavens dictum made Yin Yang feel that the 4 Seasons Tower's actions were speeding up. The Crown Prince's residence has begun to tighten its defense. The strategists have begun to contact officials and generals everywhere. The frequency of their actions has increased by 3 times compared to last month. The 3rd Prince's residence has begun to contact officials as well. They're also trying to contact the 9 Heavens dictum's people. Although they haven't made contact yet, the omen isn't good. The same goes for the 4th Prince's residence. The same goes for the 5th Prince. The Grand Tutor has been ambiguous recently. It's said that he had a dispute with General Leng Daoyin, but the exact reason is still unknown. Marshal Tai Zheng has been borrowing money from everywhere to prepare for his wedding. The censors and censors are still targeting the Board of War, impeaching all military matters that can be impeached. Old Marshal Qiu has rebutted them all. His Majesty's attitude is clear. This subordinate has found out that His Majesty doesn't seem to be in good health recently. There must be some problems in the palace, but we're too far away to understand the details and can't intervene. The disagreement between the civil and military sides has increased. The civil officials think that since the credence of peace has been signed, there will be no more war in the short term. They can take the opportunity to make peace with the other countries and fight for a considerable amount of time to recuperate, develop the people's livelihood and prosper. They can also reduce the army appropriately, save money and food, and manage the rivers. However, the military side has a completely different opinion. They think that the conflict between Yutong and the other countries of the continent is irreconcilable. The war of the nation's survival is right before our eyes. The so-called credence of peace is only an illusion of peace, a prelude to the coming storm. Even if everyone comes to Tai Zheng's wedding, it's only a declaration of war. Both sides are at loggerheads. Among the princes, the Crown Prince and the 5th Prince are on the military side while the 3rd, 4th, and 6th Princes are on the civil side. The residence of Grand Commandant is closed all year round, but old Marshal Qiu Jianhan has entered and had a long talk with the Grand Commandant. The content of the conversation is unknown. According to rumors, the Grand Commandant's health is deteriorating and his life is coming to an end. The residents of King Jing and the residents of Crown Prince have been interacting more recently than before. They also interact with the other princes, but the residence of Crown Prince is still the most frequent. This subordinate thinks that King Jing has already made his decision. The King of North Garrison is still in the north, guarding the grassland. There's no news from him. Some of the generals who have come to congratulate from other countries are already halfway there. Marshal Tai's wedding must be a battle of the winds and clouds, with storms from all over gathering in Tiantang. It's hard to predict what will happen in the end. For the past 10 days, martial artists have not entered Tiantang City frequently. The density is much lower than before. This subordinate found someone fishing at the 1,000 Feet Lake when he was investigating, but no fish took the bait for a few days. The fisherman seems to be an expert, but his subsequent movements are unknown. I don't know if this information is useful. The last piece of information was obviously a little apprehensive. All anomalies had to be reported when investigating, but news of fishing was rather common. Chapter 126. It was a headache for Yun Yang, but he could only watch and passively receive the Nine Heavens dictum's message. Severely injured, he could not even activate his mystical chi, and could not issue any commands. Yun Yang estimated that he would need at least 3 more days to be able to use a small amount of mystical chi without leaving behind any repercussions. As for fully recovering his ability, it would take at least half a month. This was the power of a top-notch expert. He did not have to attack you directly, it was just the shockwave. Then, within the range of his spiritual realm, even if he did not notice you, you would still be severely injured. A fatal injury. Faced with such a situation, even Yun Yang, the soul of the 9 Supremes, could only sigh helplessly. Actually, Yun Yang did not think that this incident was his fault. The other party was simply too powerful. Even if he was not in his current identity, he would still take a look at the sudden movement. As long as he was still human, a martial artist, he would be attracted by the aura. What was more, he had come with a purpose. One cannot have any curiosity in the martial world. That's because any curiosity could cause even an experienced martial artist to be consigned to eternal damnation. Yin Yang reminded himself in his heart. However, what comforted him was that the spectral path of the soul and the abyss path of flesh had yet to appear. At least, the legendary air of resentment had yet to surge. Perhaps this meant that those people were still alive. Yin Yang was slightly relieved. Since he could not do anything, he would take a break for now. Recuperation and recovery were the priority. Perhaps I can only enjoy such leisure in this life when I'm severely injured. Yin Yang chuckled bitterly. If so, I shall enjoy this rare leisure time. Yin Yang had only laid down for a short while before he stood up and moved his limbs. He felt that he could move freely now. As long as he did not use mystical chi or the power of his soul, a simple movement would not be a problem. He was about to speak when he seemed to recall something, and sat down immediately. He opened the message on the 9 Heavens dictum, and read the last message. When this subordinate was investigating, he found someone fishing at the 1,000 Feet Lake, but no fish took the bait for a few days. The angler seems to be an expert, but his subsequent movements are unknown. I wonder if this information is useful. Yin Yang was deep in thought as he read the message. The 1,000 Feet Lake. There are no fish for a few days straight, and they're still holding on an expert? Yin Yang's gaze flickered. Yin Yang then called Lao Mei to his side, ignoring the fact that he had to use his mystical chi. Placing his right hand on Lao Mei's shoulder, he channeled his cultivation and guided Lao Mei's mystical chi into Yin Yang's meridians. The old man fishing at the 100 Feet Lake, report to me in detail. In that instant, he felt a sharp pain in his meridians. 4 hours later, completely detailed information came in. Yin Yang looked at it for a full 2 hours. The more he looked, the brighter his eyes became. It was to the extent that he was actually a little hesitant at the end. Something caught his attention. This person is always carrying a wine gourd on his back. Wine gourd? Yin Yang finally gritted his teeth and murmured. Doesn't it matter who I die in? Cheers. The next morning. Lao Mei, look after the house. If anyone else comes, treat them well. If anyone else sends medicine, just politely decline them. Bring out my precious wine, Anne. Yin Yang made arrangements and said, Let's go, old Fong. Let's get a carriage and go fishing. Go fishing? Lao Mei and Fong Mafei were dumbfounded. They would never have imagined that their young master would have such a sudden idea. For high-level cultivators like us, why would we need to fish? We only needed to stretch our hands into the water, and a large number of fish would be caught. Was there a need to go through so much trouble? If they had seen the 9 Heavens dictum's news, they would probably be even more devastated. You don't care about so many national affairs, and you go fishing just because you heard someone was fishing? Where were the 9 supremes who protected the nation, the righteousness of Supreme Cloud? There was a faint smile on Yun Yang's face. It was precisely because of this that he wanted to go fishing. If that person was really an unparalleled expert, he must have his own reasons for waiting for 3 days. Would it not be more convenient to use mystical skills to catch fish? Besides, Yin Yang thought of something else. Back then, Supreme Earth's biggest hobby was fishing. Even when he was fishing at the 1,000-feet lake, he was often the only one fishing on the surface of the lake. There were also times when he could not catch any fish. Yun Yang only knew a little about fishing, and did not have much interest in it. Sometimes, he would even wonder, why are you sitting there if you can't catch any fish? Isn't the purpose of fishing to fish? Thinking of Supreme Earth, the corners of Yin Yang's lips curled into a smile. To him, this injury might not be entirely a bad thing. At least, I've met all of you again, my brothers. Let me see what kind of person that fishing expert is, and what his purpose is. A carriage rumbled as it moved forward. It headed towards Tiantang City, towards the 1,000-feet lake. It was said that the deepest part of the 1,000-feet lake was 1,000 feet deep. The water was crystal clear, and if it was a sunny day, one could even see dozens or even hundreds of caddies of fish swimming freely in the water. There was another saying about the 1,000-feet lake. Perhaps it was a unique feature of the lake. The west and east shores of the lake were separated by 1,000 feet. The west shore was 1,000 feet of hell, while the east shore was 1,000 feet of heaven. The east shore was filled with red flowers and green willows. Birds sang and swallows danced, the fragrance of cosmetics wafting through half the city, while the west shore was dark and overgrown with weeds. Such a situation was not entirely due to the geographical difference. The main reason was that there was a mass grave slightly further away from the west shore. Who would be willing to come to such a place? The south shore was connected to a main road, while the north was connected to a field of rocks with half a cliff behind it. When Supreme Earth was free, he would often act as a fisherman on the north shore, holding a fishing rod in his hand. Sometimes he would sit there for 2 days. He was usually the only one fishing on the entire surface of the lake. That was because all the locals knew that the 100-jong lake was too deep. Even if one was extremely lucky, one would only be able to catch some palm-sized fish at best. Those truly big fish would never be able to be caught. In that case, what was the meaning of the person fishing there? Yin Yang did not think too much about it. If you're really interesting, my trip here wouldn't be in vain. However, if you're just here to kill time, it doesn't matter. I'm here to take a few days off. I'm not lying when I say that I'm here to fish and relax. Not long after, both Yun Yang and Supreme Earth arrived at the north shore of the 1,000-feet lake. Just as Yun Yang alighted from the carriage, he was stunned by what he saw. There was actually someone fishing on the north shore of the 1,000-feet lake, and he had occupied the spot where Supreme Earth usually fished. He was currently holding a fishing rod in his hand, fishing with full concentration. The person wore a wide straw cape and a straw hat that almost covered his entire body. He held a black fishing rod in his hand, standing as steady as a mountain. Yun Yang was in a trance, as if he was seeing Supreme Earth smiling at him. For a moment, he almost thought that time had turned back. The attire of the person before him was exactly what Supreme Earth had worn when he was fishing in the past. How could this person be so coincidentally occupying this spot? The north shore was so wide, there was naturally more than one fishing spot. However, Yun Yang asked Fang Mafei to send him to the centermost spot, which was also the concave fishing spot. Other people could only see someone fishing here, but they would never be able to see what the person looked like. At most, they could only see a shadow, that was all. The person from before was currently in this spot. However, this seat was definitely not spacious. There was only a big protruding rock, and that person was sitting steadily on it. With a glance, Yun Yang felt that this fellow was surrounded by an aura that prevented strangers from getting close to him. Whether he was an expert or not was not a question. However, the meaning of "don't talk to me" was very clear from his body language. Yun Yang understood immediately. If he were to initiate a conversation with such a fellow, there was a 99% chance that he would be rebuffed. However, was this the person? Beside this person, There was only a rock that had just emerged from the water, about half a foot wide. At least, from Feng Mafei's point of view, it was impossible for anyone to sit there. I'll sit here. Yin Yang pointed with a smile, indicating where he could sit. Despite Feng Mafei's embarrassment, he could only think of a way to make a seat for himself, even if there was none. My apologies. Feng Mafei spoke to the person and flew up, carrying a large square rock from behind him and placing it into the water. Poof! The water splashed. As the boulder sank, the surrounding water bubbles rose one after another, and a large circle of ripples spread out, affecting a wide range. The person mumbled as if he was cursing. Yin Yang was still standing quietly with his arms behind his back. Hearing the person's mumble, he chuckled inwardly. Didn't you not want anyone to talk to you? All right, I'll let you talk to me then. Continue. Feng Mafei scratched his head, continuing to move the rocks. Poof, poof, poof. More than a dozen rocks were tossed in consecutively, and Feng Mafei actually managed to form a sturdy platform in the water. Naturally, the water splashed and the surface of the water was murky. Chapter 127. That person frowned and tilted his head in dissatisfaction. It was obvious that he was extremely dissatisfied in his heart. Anyone could understand that he was fishing quietly here for a while. But King threw rocks at him as soon as you came. Not only did you scare the fish away, even my leisurely fishing was ruined by you. You actually King built a platform. Why don't you go to heaven? Why don't you just build a house here? This is the best way to burn a zither and cook a crane. Alright. You're finally done. You actually placed a chair on the stone platform? The man was truly shocked now. CK, are you trying to fish here? His eyes widened as he watched the unbelievable and unimaginable events unfold one after another. The person in charge seemed to be a rich young master, the kind that did not even have the strength to truss a chicken. No, this fellow was severely injured. He actually came to fish with such a heavy injury. Everything was done by the person behind him. She set up a table for him, set up a chair for him, and even made a backrest for him. She set up a fishing rod, a fishing line, a hook, and a float for him. He had even brought a small blanket. Are you going to help him fish again later? I say. Isn't this done? Still causing trouble? Plop, plop, plop. It was as if he wanted to smash all the fish in the lake to death as he threw bait in. After a while, he suddenly turned to smile at him and said, I'm so sorry for scaring all your fish away just now. I'll make a nest for you as well. Plop, plop, plop. He continued to throw bait at him for a long time. The fisherman was completely dumbfounded, tongue-tied and speechless. He was speechless for a long while. Even with his years of experience, he was still at a loss for what to do with the bizarre development before him. He could not help scratching his head. As he stretched his hand out, Yin Yang could sensitively see that the man's head was mostly covered in grayish-white hair. He did not know how high his cultivation base was, but it seemed like he was not young anymore. When Yin Yang finally sat down leisurely, at least an hour had passed. What a farce! However, the farce did not seem to have ended. It was only just the beginning, because the elder saw Yin Yang sitting calmly. He did not even have the intention to extend his fishing rod. He was only holding the bait, pinching it here and there. What was he up to this time? Cough. The old man coughed and asked doubtfully, Young master, you've spent a lot of effort to arrange the positions. You've even placed the bait everywhere. Why aren't you pulling the rod? Yin Yang replied with a smile. I've frightened the fish just now. Most of them won't dare to come over now. There's bait on the left and right as bait. As long as I wait quietly for a while, the fish will be lured over. Of course, I'll drop the rod after some time. The old man laughed involuntarily. Then, I'm afraid that young master will have to wait for a long time. Based on my experience, after such a big commotion, there will be some palm-sized fishes coming over within 2 hours. The bigger fishes will definitely not come over. If you want to catch a big fish, you will have to wait at least 6 hours. Yin Yang sat down comfortably and leaned against the back of the chair, saying faintly, As long as I can catch a big fish, forget 6 hours. I can even wait for 3 days and 3 nights. Yin Yang smiled. Patience is needed to catch a big fish. Old sir, don't be impatient. Not only did the elder's plan to mock Yin Yang fail, he had been taught a lesson instead. He choked for a moment. He sat down in a huff and shut his mouth, not saying another word. Initially, he wanted to get rid of this fellow with just a few words, so that he could regain his peace. He didn't expect that this fellow would actually talk for 3 days and 3 nights. All right, he wanted to see if this rich young master, who always asked others to do his dirty work, really had that much patience. However, his silence did not mean that Yin Yang would not speak either. Old sir, where did you buy this straw cape? It looks like it's not bad. As long as you wear it, you won't have to be afraid of wind, frost, rain, and snow. And this bamboo hat, it can cover the entire lake. The elder snorted but did not answer. If only there was a bamboo hat to cover this huge sun. Yin Yang sighed, sounding like he was sighing. The elder still did not speak. May I ask old sir's name? Yin Yang asked. The elder was completely focused on the float, turning a deaf ear to Yin Yang. Old sir, how old are you? Yin Yang asked again. The elder's gaze was still fixed on the float, not saying a word. Yin Yang scratched his head, and suddenly fished out a rock the size of a human head from beside him, throwing it with a ha. Poof! Water splashed into the sky. It landed right in front of the elder's fishing rod. A single rock raised 1,000 ripples. The surface of the lake that had finally calmed down was stirred again. After this rock, it would be a long time before any fish would come here again. The elder stood up at once and said angrily, "Young master, how can you be so insensible? You, aren't you causing trouble?" Yin Yang asked with a grin. May I ask old sir's name? The elder huffed angrily. This old man is going somewhere else, not here anymore. He stood up and made to leave. Old Fong, let's not stay here either. This old sir seems to be an expert. How can we miss an expert? Let's follow him. Wherever he goes, we'll follow. We can't lose him. Yin Yang called out to Fong Mafei and stood up as well. The elder was speechless. He let out a long sigh towards the sky. He could not help but feel around his back, and actually took out a huge wine gourd. Twisting the lid open, he took a huge gulp and glared at Yin Yang. This is infuriating. Old sir, don't be angry. Don't be angry. Yin Yang said gently. You're already so old. What if something bad happens to you? Wouldn't it be a pity that this place is so deserted? What if something happens to you? This time, not only did the elder almost pass out from anger, even Fong Mafei was speechless. Until now, he still could not figure out what Yin Yang meant by causing trouble like this. Wasn't he simply making trouble out of nothing? Young master, are you still young? Was it really appropriate to do this? Yin Yang looked at the huge wine gourd, a strange look in his eyes as he said softly, Old sir, this wine is not bad. The old man snorted and rolled his eyes, hugging the wine gourd. This child actually wants to drink my wine? Is he thinking too much? The old man snorted and wiped his mouth before putting the wine gourd back, still unwilling to talk to a certain someone. Old Fong, where's our wine? Yin Yang turned to ask. The corners of Fong Mafei's lips twitched. Immediately, a moment later, a table was placed in front of Yin Yang. Then 10 piping hot side dishes were placed on the table one by one. 2 wine glasses, sparkling and translucent. A pot of wine was placed on the edge of the table. However, one could tell at a glance that this wine pot was obviously an antique that had been around for a long time. Even the sticker on it was almost unrecognizable. From the outside to the inside, it was obvious that the pot was old wine, a fine wine that had been around for a long time. The old man, who was holding the fishing rod, glanced at the pot of wine unintentionally and actually paused for a moment. His eyes, which were covered by the bamboo hat, could not help but stare blankly. Speaking of wine, there have been countless brewmasters in this world for thousands of years. There are also a variety of wines that compete with each other, each with their own ingenuity. Yin Yang said slowly, however, to this day, there is only the god of wine from 330 years ago, Feng Xiang'a, who can be acknowledged by the entire continent as a brewmaster. As he spoke, even the old man who had been indifferent could not help but nod slowly. Indeed, Feng Xiang's achievements in the field of wine were undeniable. As an expert of his generation, Feng Xiang stood aloof from worldly affairs all his life. From the age of 30 to the age of 279, which was 20 years ago when he went missing, he had only devoted himself to two things in his life. One was medicine, and the other was wine. Back then, the martial world called him the phantom physician god of wine. His medical skills were superb as well, but his medical methods were unconventional, which was why he was called Phantom. However, let's not talk about his medical skills today, let's talk about his wine. The number of wines he had personally brewed in his lifetime was uncountable. However, there were very few wines that could be recognized by him, and there were only 7 in total. He called these 7 wines the Big Dipper wine. The old man sat aside with a hint of mockery on his face under the bamboo hat. What do you know? Feng Xiang has better and more highly regarded wines. Humph. Yun Yang said faintly. However, not many people know that this so-called Big Dipper wine is only a wine that Feng Xiang has promoted to the public. Although each of the Big Dipper wine is already a premium brew, it's still not at the level of a superior quality. Actually, the 3 wines that Feng Xiang treasured the most were the wines he used to entertain his friends. They were divided into the heaven, earth, and man wines. He used them to entertain his friends based on their friendship, cultivation base, past, and experiences. The old man heaved a long sigh of relief, thinking, "This child actually knows such a story. How remarkable." Yun Yang said, "These 3 wines are considered superior, but they're still not the premium wines that Feng Xiang admired the most. The premium wines that he kept in his collection, the best wines in the entire Tianxian continent, aren't these heaven, earth, and man wines, but the prime of wines. The ingredients used to brew the so-called prime of wines are already extremely rare." Feng Xiang had collected countless rare and precious materials from the peaks and seabed of Tiannan, northwest, and sea to brew them. He had only brewed 99 pots in his lifetime. When the wine was brewed, it was sealed without tasting it, difficult to open. Even Feng Xiang himself could hardly drink it. However, when he was 230 years old, he only drank this one wine when he drank. To Feng Xiang then, there was no other wine in this world that could go down his throat other than this prime of wines. When he disappeared, there were only 9 pots of this famous but untasted prime of wines left. They were sold out the moment they were discovered. In the end, only 6 pots entered the market and were auctioned many times. According to the highest price, it seemed to be 3,000 mystical crystals. Yin Yang spoke slowly. There seemed to be a strange charm in his voice. 3,000 mystical crystals. On the other side, the old man wearing the bamboo hat looked up at the sky, his heart filled with regret. "I got the news of the auction back then too late. Otherwise, one of the 6 pots of wine would have been mine." Chapter 128. To this day, the 6 pots of wine that had entered the market have been hidden by wine lovers and are rarely seen again. As for the other 3 pots of wine, no one knows of their whereabouts. However, one day, when the empire of Yutong's Marquis Yin went out, he saved someone by accident and became best friends with the person. When they parted reluctantly, the person gave Marquis Yin a pot of wine. Coincidentally, it was the prime of wine. Back then, it had been 112 years since Feng Xiang brewed this pot of wine. Yin Yang smiled. The old man could not hold it in any longer and said loudly, "What are you trying to say after spouting so much nonsense? Could it be that this wine of yours is the prime of wine? What a joke." Yin Yang smiled. "It looks like old sir is not from Tiantang City. So what?" The old man's tone was irascible. "If you were from Tiantang City, you would know that the Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, who terrorized the world with his sword, has an only young master. His name is Yin Yang." Yin Yang said, "This young master Yin Yang is born with rosy lips and pearly white teeth. He is handsome and elegant, with a dignified demeanor. He is one of the most handsome men in this world. Perhaps, it could be said that if there was a contest for handsome men in this world, this young master Yin Yang would be crowned the winner, without even having to participate." Oel Amos was losing his cool more and more. He was on the verge of flying into a rage. No matter how much you praise others, it's still nonsense. Since he was praising this young master Yun Yang so much, this fellow in front of him could not be Yun Yang. How could there be anyone in this world who would praise himself like this? Otherwise he would be too shameless. Since he was not Yun Yang, what use was he? He was not fated with the prime of wine after all. Yun Yang said with a grin. Old sir, it must be fate that we meet by chance. Let this young master introduce himself. I am Yun Yang, the only young master of Marquis Yin, who we were talking about and praising just now. The old man almost coughed. This sentence was simply a strange and unexpected peak. You've been showering me with extravagant praise, but it turns out that you're just praising yourself? Is there really such a shameless person in this world? The old man almost laughed in exasperation. He squinted his eyes and teased. You are the young master of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Yun Yang? According to what you've said, this jar of wine is the sovereign of wine, one of the remaining 9 jars of wine. Wrong. Yun Yang was resolute. The old man was stunned again. Why are you bragging if it's not you? Yun Yang said. According to what I know, the owners of the 6 pots of wine that were auctioned off were wine connoisseurs, but they were all addicted to wine and had already finished the dream. No one knows where the remaining 2 jars are, let alone if they still exist in this world. Yun Yang said faintly. Therefore, this pot of wine of mine can be said to be the one and only pot of wine in this world. It makes sense to say that it's the one and only pot of wine in existence. The old man was stunned. Is this really that jar? Yun Yang said faintly. Whether it is or not, there's a way to verify it. Since old sir likes wine, I'm sure you've heard that Feng Xiang's supreme wine can form a soaring phoenix in the air once the clay seal is broken and the fragrance of the wine wafts out. This is Feng Xiang's unique mark. I believe that not many people would imitate it for the few remaining jars of wine. The old man's interest was piqued at once. He was drooling with desire, unable to sit still. Yun Yang's palm rose and fell. There was a loud clap. The clay seal had been broken, and an indescribable fragrance of wine wafted out. The old man took 3 steps towards him, his nostrils twitching wildly. Swoosh, 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 as the fragrance of the wine rose, the image of a soaring phoenix slowly materialized in the air. Although it was hovering in the air, its arrogant gaze was filled with disdain, looking down on the world. It's the supreme wine. The old man's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Looking at the phoenix that was slowly dispersing in the air, his breathing quickened. With a raise of his hand, the bamboo hat flew away. It revealed a chiseled face that was filled with vicissitudes, but his gaze was clear and bright. His eyes were like a 4 or 5-year-old child's, clear with distinct black and white. There was even a hint of innocence in them. The old man's hair was grayish-white like what Yun Yang had seen just now, but looking at each strand by strand, he did not look old at all. Instead, he was filled with the energy of life. The vicissitudes on his face were as if he had gone through all the worldly affairs of his life. At first glance, he looked lonely and weary, but upon closer inspection, one would actually think that the face was handsome. His eyebrows, in particular, were slanted upwards, but the arc was not too wide. There was no menacing aura. However, if he had sprung up abruptly, the imposing aura would have been quite intimidating. Yun Yang was even more certain when he saw it. Of course, it's the supreme wine. Yun Yang slowly began to remove the last layer of defense on the wine jar. Using a dagger, he only managed to make a thumb-sized cut. The old man's expression was one of admiration. Those who had never tasted the wine brewed by Feng Xiang would not know the intention of doing so. Even if there was only a little fragrance from Feng Xiang's wine, it would be a great waste. Yun Yang's actions made a thumb-sized cut at the top, but the bottom was at most the size of a soybean. After pouring a cup, he filled it with the wooden cork that he had scooped out. It was still seamless, and the wine would not escape through the gap. Yun Yang smiled and said, "It's Feng Xiang's supreme wine after all. Of course, I have to cherish it." The old man nodded with a smile. "That's right." Yun Yang lifted the wine jar and slowly poured the clear but slightly viscous wine into the goblet. When it was 80% full, The wine's fragrance was intoxicating, filling the entire lake. Finishing the goblet, Yin Yang took a whiff of it, intoxicated, and said, "It's indeed a dreamy item close to Tao. Legend has it that drinking wine of supremacy can bring one close to the realm of Tao. Sigh, it's a pity that there's too little of it." As he sighed, he stuffed the wooden cork back in. Placing the wine jar aside carefully, he picked up the goblet and took a sip. His eyes shone. Great wine. It's a never-before-seen wine indeed. It lives up to its reputation as a dreamy item. The old man beside him could not help being stunned, stuttering, You're not going to buy me a drink?" This fellow had laid out a table full of dishes, brought out a jar of wine, and talked about the past and present, blowing his own trumpet for half a day, hooking this old man's appetite to his throat. "In the end, you're going to drink it yourself? You've laid out 2 goblets, all right? Are you just trying to look symmetrical?" Yin Yang was even more shocked, staring at the old man with wide eyes. "Buy you a drink? Why should I buy you a drink?" The old man's mouth was agape as he looked at him in shock. Didn't you say so much just to buy me a drink?" Yin Yang looked at him speechlessly. "Old sir, I've said so much just to buy you a drink. Where did this come from? You're thinking too much." If Dong Tianlong and the other popinjays were here, they would definitely slap the table in shock. Boss is boss. What's wrong with me praising myself? What's wrong with me analyzing the origins of all my wines in detail? Can't I show off? When it came to showing off, it had to be done in front of others. This is the ultimate example of popinjays of my generation. This is obviously the pinnacle of pretentiousness, a textbook example of popinjays. Perfect, it's too perfect. The old man was exasperated, the veins on his forehead pulsating. For a moment he was speechless. "I've said so much, from the beginning to the end. I only wanted to introduce my wine." Yin Yang said in confusion. "I'm done with the introduction, am I right? You know it too, don't you? You know it too, don't you? We had a pleasant conversation. It's done, isn't it? Isn't it also a pleasure for you to watch me drink? Do you think that just anyone can see the wonderful appearance of the wine supremacy? One should know how to be content." Yin Yang said seriously, "At least I've let you see the phoenix." The old man suddenly had the urge to kill someone. Your father listened to you for half a day, just to see the phoenix formed by the smell of wine. How despicable must I be then? Actually, I have a hobby of introducing the good things I own to others. It's fine if you think I'm showing off, Yin Yang said with a smile that was especially despicable. Yin Yang grinned. His smile was especially wicked as he said, "My delicious food, drinks, fun, all the good things I have. I enjoy them myself, watching others drool over them. I don't even need to eat to go with the wine, and I can just enjoy a few more bowls of rice. It's so satisfying, you know?" The old man's exasperation grew more pronounced and thicker. He was so embarrassed that he did not know where to put his hands and feet. He felt like billions of mud horses were galloping through the manure soup after a rainstorm. "This is so embarrassing. Your father has lived for hundreds of years, and I've never been as embarrassed as I am today. My face is burning. This bastard is the most despicable person I've ever seen in my life. But why do I feel that what this fellow said is so reasonable? Even if it's crooked, it's still reasonable. I actually have nothing to say." The old man stomped his feet and turned to leave. He really did not have the face to stay here. However, Yin Yang suddenly spoke again. "If old sir is really bored and doesn't blame me for startling your fish just now, then let's fish, drink, and chat." Watching the scenery of the lake and the mountains, feeling the chilly autumn wind. It's one of life's great joys. The old man had already turned around. When he suddenly heard these words, he couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. If I were to turn back and drink, wouldn't I be even more embarrassed? Even though he wanted to turn back, his neck was stiff, and he refused to turn back no matter what. However, if he did not turn back, the pot of wine would have already been opened. It would probably be gone forever. Yin Yang spoke again. "It's better to share the joy than to be happy alone. Please do me this favor, old sir." The old man turned back like a whirlwind and chuckled. "It's rare for you to show such sincerity. It would be impolite for this old man to refuse." The smile on his face softened. Yin Yang was delighted. He had learned this trick from Dong Tianling. He had to admit that this despicable person's trick seemed to be quite useful. When Yun Yang heard about such a person, he already had a plan in his mind. The difficult part was only the beginning. How to get him to drink his wine. This was the most important point. How could such a person come and drink obediently just because Yun Yang offered to buy him a drink? Yun Yang finally reached the goal of the first stage, after going around in circles for half a day. Since the wine had reached his expectations, then, no matter what, this was the only way for him to fight against the other side at the moment. What to do next was the most important thing. Success or failure depended on this one move. Tonight at 0:00 p.m., Supreme was released. Brothers and sisters, please subscribe and support. Yin Yang's success or failure depended on this one move, and so did the success or failure of Supreme. 2 months of free, 410,000 words of updates. All the effort would be revealed at midnight. Chapter 129. Of course, Yun Yang would not make things difficult for him. He poured a goblet of wine for the old man and raised his cup. Please. The old man had already picked it up hastily. Please. He tipped his head back and emptied the goblet. He praised. Unrivaled in the world indeed. The prime of wine lives up to its reputation. I'm afraid I'll have to quit drinking after drinking this wine. Then his expression turned solemn. The wine had dispersed, and he could faintly feel an inexplicable force of Tao. It was an impact of the realm of Tao. Although it was weak and almost undetectable, such an impact was enough to shake an expert cultivator like him. The force of Tao that could only appear in this wine at its peak was what made Feng Xiang's wine so precious. He then took a deep breath and collected the wine from his limbs and bones, suppressing it into the secret parts of his body. Now was not the best time to comprehend it. He would release it when the time was right, and he wanted to comprehend it. With his cultivation base and control over his body, it was not an exaggeration to say that he could force the goblet of wine out of his body at any time, and pour it back into the goblet to drink it again. The effect and strength of the wine would not diminish, even if he were to drink it again. If Yin Yang knew what this old man was doing, he would definitely be dumbfounded. He drank the wine down his throat and swallowed it, burying it into his body, not absorbing it at all. That was the real deal. Yin Yang could not even imagine what kind of expert would be able to achieve such a feat at his current stage. If this old man was a little more extreme and disliked Yin Yang, he would most likely be able to crush Yin Yang to death, as long as his aura and aura reached a certain level, without needing to fight. What an expert! However, before Yin Yang came here, he had already disregarded his own life and death. Yun Yang estimated that he might not be able to defeat Old He's cultivation base, even if he cultivated for another 10 years. If he could not find a breakthrough here, what was the harm in dying here? Another goblet. Yin Yang's breath reeked of wine. Good wine. The old man was speechless looking at Yin Yang's breath that reeked of wine. It had to be said that it was a great waste of God's gift for Yin Yang to drink such an exquisite wine that only deities were worthy of. Because with his current level of cultivation, he was completely unable to comprehend the true wonders of this wine. Like a cow chewing on a peony, the old man let out a long sigh, raised his cup, and drained it in one gulp. Yin Yang rolled his eyes. What's wrong with you, old man? I've already treated you to a drink, and it's such an outstanding supreme of wine at that. Yet you're saying that I'm just a cow chewing on peonies. There was no one else like him. However, following the effects of the alcohol, the two of them were clearly getting warmer and warmer. Fang Mafei, who was watching from 100 feet behind him, felt countless question marks hovering over his head. He just couldn't figure it out. Young master, Supreme Cloud, you didn't pay attention to so many important things, and came here to fish. It's fine that you're fishing. You're injured now. It's good that you're cultivating and recovering your energy. However, not only are you not fishing properly, you're also provoking others to fish properly. First, you've offended them, and now you're treating them to a drink. This is fine. But what you've taken out is the only remaining jar of this priceless wine in the entire Tianxian continent. And you're treating an old man whom you've never met before. This was truly an absolute waste. Feng Mafei, who had some understanding of the supreme of wine, felt like he was about to faint. If he did not know that Yin Yang was supreme cloud, just by looking at his behavior, he was obviously an extreme popinjay, a super popinjay that surpassed the heavens. Old Sir likes fishing very much. Yin Yang smiled. Fishing is a form of pleasure, and also a way of life. The old man drank with his eyes squinted. You're right. But there aren't many people who can focus on fishing in peace in this continent now. Yin Yang sighed. I like fishing very much too. Yin Yang's voice turned deep and distant. Old Sir is much older than me. I'm sure your realization is deeper than mine. The old man asked curiously, realization? You're so young. What realization do you have? Why don't you tell me about it first? Yin Yang smiled faintly. Then this junior shall start the ball rolling. I'll listen to Old Sir's opinion later. I personally think that when we're fishing, we form heaven, earth, and man, the coexistence of the three elements. The old man was taken aback. What do you mean? Such a theory was unheard of. Even though the old man was knowledgeable, he was still interested in probing further. When we're fishing, we're the heaven. The water in front of us is, of course, the earth. The fish in the water are humans. Yin Yang said leisurely. The bait we throw can be anything in this boundless world. It can be wine, women, avarice, fame, and fortune. As for the fish below, due to their different personalities and preferences, they choose the bait they like to chase after. Whether it's a big or small fish, as long as the bait we throw catches its fancy, it'll take the bait. The only difference is the length of time. Even if it's a fish that stands aloof from worldly affairs, it can't avoid taking a fancy to a certain bait, and will take the bait it likes. Yin Yang said, it's just like life in this continent. How many people can avoid the temptation of wine, women, avarice, fame, and fortune? Watching a fish being caught by me. At that moment, my heart will be filled with a myriad of emotions. It's indescribable. It means that no matter how much the fish that's been hooked struggles, it can't escape its fate. Yin Yang said, isn't it the same for humans? As long as you step onto a certain path and work hard for a certain pursuit, there's basically no turning back. Actually, we're eating bait every day, or rather, we're moving forward with the bait that we yearn for in our hearts. Yin Yang smiled and raised his cup. Please. The old man frowned and thought deeply before saying, that makes sense. It really does make sense. I didn't expect you to have such an epiphany at such a young age. Yin Yang smiled faintly. Also, looking at the water in front of us, even if it's not moving, it feels like it's floating and constantly changing. Perhaps, when we can't even notice it, the fish in the water has already experienced a lot of vicissitudes. As for heaven's will, although it's existed since the beginning of time, why would it care about a person? Or a person? Heaven's will goes on forever. But how many times has the human realm changed and changed? From this point of view, what's the difference between us and the fish? There are even some places where we're not as good as the fish. Humans are not as good as the fish. The old man closed his eyes and thought about Yin Yang's words carefully. After a long time, he sighed and said, you're right. He paused and said, what you've said is not bad at all. It makes sense. He kept his eyes closed and did not open them. After a while, he opened them and said, thank you, young friend, for your guidance. He actually bowed to Yin Yang in a very formal manner. His eyes were filled with contemplation. After a long time he said, young friend, you're young but you seem to have experienced a lot. Yin Yang smiled faintly. Of course not as much as you. The old man kept his thoughts and said with a smile, let's drink, let's drink. Please. Yin Yang drank as he poured wine while the old man emptied his goblet, looking extremely refreshed. The pot of prime of wine was about 10 caddies at most. After 100 years of accumulation, there were only 4 to 5 caddies of wine left. It was emptied before long. Although Yin Yang had drunk quite a bit as well, it was only about 20 to 30% of the total amount. The remaining 70 to 80% had gone into the old man's stomach. Feng Mafei was envious of the scene. grumbling inwardly. "O young master, O Lord Supreme Cloud, why didn't you share some of this good stuff with me and Lao Mei? Is it really all right to let an outsider take all of it?" However, what young friend said isn't applicable here. The old man was embarrassed to see that he had basically drunk all of it, so he took the initiative to speak up. "May I ask what it is?" Yin Yang asked. "There's a type of fish in this lake that not only are fishing experts rarely able to catch, but even cultivation experts are helpless against it," the old man said. Yin Yang was taken aback and said in surprise, "Oh, may I ask what's so special about this fish that even cultivation experts can't do anything about it?" The old man chuckled and said, "The reason this fish can't be caught is because it has an innate ability. Once it's attacked by an external force, be it mystical chi or any other force, even if it's the force of thought, it'll turn into flowing water immediately and leave no trace behind. How can it be caught? Even if one were to catch this fish when it's defenseless, it'll turn into flowing water and mist immediately, disappearing without a trace. No matter how strong one's cultivation base is, one can't capture even a drop of the fish's essence. There's such a mystical fish in the 1,000-foot lake." Yin Yang was stunned. "That's right, there's such a mystical fish," the old man said. Yin Yang thought about it and said, "You said that fishing experts rarely get anything, but it doesn't mean that they don't get anything at all. This means that although this fish is mystical, there's still a chance of catching it." The old man smiled and said, "That's right. This fish can't be caught by force, but it can be caught with fishing hooks. As long as the hook is successfully hooked onto the fish's mouth, the fish will no longer have the ability to turn into flowing water. Once it leaves the water, it'll be no different from an ordinary fish. It's not right to say that this fish is completely the same as an ordinary fish, because this fish's appearance is very strange. There are only 7 scales on its entire body, and each scale is of a different color." "Old sir, are you talking about the 7-scaled deity?" Yin Yang was moved. "But this is only a legend of the 1,000-foot lake." "That's right. It's the legendary 7-scaled deity, but I can guarantee that this fish truly exists," the old man said faintly. "Besides, there are only 3 places in the entire Tianxian continent that have this fish, and this 1,000-foot lake is the 4th place that has yet to be discovered." Yin Yang suddenly thought of something. Chapter 130. When the 9 Supremes had first gathered, Supreme Earth had said that although Supreme Water's physique was compatible with the 9 Heavens domain, it was not the best. One day, when Supreme Water returned, the group was surprised to find out that Supreme Water's cultivation speed had become the fastest among them. Supreme Earth was very puzzled about this. He had even asked Supreme Water what was going on. Supreme Water could not explain it either. He only said that his cultivation base could not keep up, and he was depressed, so he went fishing at the 1,000-foot lake to relax. He caught a few fish and ate them. He did not feel anything unusual, but when he cultivated the water spirit conjuration, he was unprecedentedly skilled. He even felt that the water spirit conjuration was a cultivation method tailor-made for him. He did not need to put in much effort, and his progress could be improved by leaps and bounds. The few of them had even gone to the 1,000-foot lake to catch fish for this. After all, Supreme Water's only special encounter during that period of time was to eat a few fish from the 1,000-foot lake. It was a pity that although they had caught a lot of fish, almost all the fish in the 1,000-foot lake had been caught that time. They ate until their bellies were round, and they were almost all fattened up, but there was no effect at all. In the end, he denied this possibility. However, Supreme Earth's fishing habit seemed to have been formed then. Among the brothers, the ones with the highest cultivation base were Supreme Earth, Supreme Water, and Supreme Thunder. In spite of this, Supreme Water was the best when it came to the cultivation of their respective arcane skills. Yin Yang's thoughts ran wild. From 1 to 2, another incident surfaced in his mind. One day 2 years ago, Supreme Earth had returned from fishing and called out to Supreme Water mysteriously, saying that he would treat him to fish. Since then, Supreme Water's arcane skill cultivation had exploded at an even higher rate than before. He had advanced triumphantly, and had broken through the 7th stage of the water spirit conjuration. Compared to the other brothers, he was 3 to 4 levels higher. However, the brothers were only happy about it, and did not think too much about it. Since then, as long as Supreme Earth had nothing to do and had no mission, he would squat here to fish every day. Could this be the reason why Big Brother would come here to fish whenever he had nothing to do? A realization formed in Yin Yang's heart at that moment. Old sir, since no one else has noticed the peculiarity of this lake, how did you discover it? Yin Yang asked curiously. This old man came to Tiantang City a few years ago because I happened to look at the 1,000-feet lake, and saw a faint rainbow. That's why I came down to fish. Back then, I caught a 7-scaled immortal from here. That's how I felt. The old man smiled. When he spoke, he sounded a little unnatural. If these words were heard by an ordinary person, they would probably just let it go. In spite of this, Yin Yang had grasped 2 key points immediately. Occasionally, he would overlook the 1,000-feet lake. Overlook? What did that mean? This 1,000-feet lake is a vast expanse of flat land. Where are you looking down from? How exactly was he going to get a bird's-eye view and come down to fish? Or did you come down to fish? However, Yin Yang's expression remained unchanged as he said with a smile. Legend has it that after the 7-scaled fairy eats it, one can become immortal and retain one's looks forever. I wonder if it's true. The old man snorted and said, That's just a rumor about a village man and a foolish woman. How can it be trusted? In this world, there's nothing that can make its user immortal and retain one's looks forever. Yin Yang asked curiously, May I ask Senior, what are the benefits of eating the 7-scaled fairy? Senior said that you caught one by chance. I'm sure you're familiar with its benefits. The old man looked at him meaningfully and said, The human body is in line with the universe's creation, yin and yang, the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. These physiques are the foundation of defying nature. However, those who know this truth are few and far between in this world. Most of the people in this world will never know what kind of physique they have, wasting the precious raft that is the human body. Among all these physiques, there's one called the water spirit celestial body. To put it more bluntly, it's a body of water, a physique of water. The water physique is actually not that rare. There are many people who can swim faster than others. They can swim fast, and they don't find it difficult to swim underwater. There are even people who can breathe underwater, and they don't feel uncomfortable staying underwater for a long time. This kind of person is probably the so-called water physique. They're compatible with the water spirit celestial body. The old man said faintly, However, this is only the most common and broadest view. To advance this physique to the next level and become a water spirit celestial body, one needs to go through 1,000 hardships, go through life and death, and still, one might not succeed. However, with the help of the 7-scaled fairy in this lake, the old man seemed to despise the name 7-scaled fairy, but he still said, As long as one eats one, the potential of a person with the water spirit celestial body can be activated, transforming into a true water spirit celestial body. This is the unique effect of this fish. Even if a person without the water spirit celestial body eats it, they'll feel like they've returned home after entering the water. There's no need to worry about drowning. Yin Yang hesitated and asked, What if it's eaten by someone with another physique? The old man frowned, a little impatient with the question. Eaten by someone with another physique? There'll be effects for people with other physiques as well, but the effects won't be great. For example, those with the wood spirit celestial body will benefit from eating it, because water is wood. However, those with the metal and earth spirit celestial bodies won't benefit at all if they eat it. What's more, if those with the fire spirit celestial body eat it, it'll damage their physique instead. It's not just a saying that water and fire don't mix. Yin Yang lowered his head, feeling a warmth in his heart. It turned out that the reason his eldest Supreme Earth came here to fish every day was not for him, but for his brother Supreme Water. For his brother to eat this fish and increase his ability. He had been fishing here all these years as long as there was no mission. What if the fated one eats two of the seven-scaled fairy? Yin Yang's heart wavered, but he asked persistently. The old man looked at Yin Yang strangely. This old man has only caught one after so many years. It's already a blessing from the heavens. You actually want to eat two? Yin Yang chuckled awkwardly. The world is unpredictable. Who can say for sure? There's always a chance. Suddenly, he recalled his current physique and the air of vitality. He could not help asking, is this fish considered a mystical beast? The question stumped the old man. After a moment's pause, he pondered for a long time before saying, it's really hard to say. He looked at Yin Yang's body, measuring him from head to toe, and chuckled. However, if you eat this fish, it'll probably be quite useful. Yin Yang was delighted. Do I have the water spirit physique? The old man chuckled strangely and said, you're definitely not the water spirit physique, but you can eat it. And it's useful to eat it. His gaze grew stranger and stranger. Finally, an irrepressible smile crept onto his face. Because your physique is yin and yang in one body. The universe and the five elements are all in one. Your physique is actually an amalgamation of all human physiques. Yin Yang heaved a sigh of relief and said, I didn't know that my physique is so impressive. Haha. The old man could not help but chuckle. Impressive indeed. This old man has never known that there's actually a physique like yours in this world. Your physique can indeed be called the best in this world. Yin Yang did not mind, but he was excited nonetheless. Really? Really? The old man chuckled strangely. Your physique is the best in this world, trash. Water and fire converge. Wind and thunder are one. Yin and yang are compatible. The five elements are all in one. The universe and the universe are all in one. Your physique is truly the Milky Way. The old man could not help but guffaw as he spoke. Your traits are more numerous than the stars in the sky. This is the Milky Way. He was still babbling on, trying to explain himself. Yin Yang was exasperated, his pretty face as dark as the bottom of a wok, looking at the old man's wide-open mouth, and his tongue that was bouncing happily along with his laughter. Yin Yang felt like he had just been F***ed. I've treated you to such good wine, and you're actually insulting me like this. Don't you know how to be more merciful? He wished he could scoop the wine out. Give me back my wine. Give me back my prime of wine, my dream. All right. We've talked so much and so much time has passed. Let's focus on fishing. The old man walked back swaying. Every year, after this period of time, we can no longer catch this seven-scaled fairy that you speak of. Yin Yang's eyes darted around as he said, Old sir, why don't we make a bet? The old man turned his head and raised his brows. Bet? What are we betting on? Yin Yang replied, Of course we're betting on fishing here. How about we bet on catching this seven-scaled fairy? The old man looked at him thoughtfully and finally chuckled. Child, so you know who this old man is? Yin Yang wore a bashful smile. I didn't know at first. The old man snorted and said, You didn't know at first? If you really didn't know, would you have taken out such good wine? You've used all sorts of tricks to make this old man notice you. Then you've provoked me. You've used the wine to ease the tension and talked about life. Step by step, you've come to this point, and now you want to make a bet with this old man? A pot of prime of wine is not something an ordinary person can take out. However, you've only taken it out as a stepping stone. How is it right if you don't have a request for such a grand gesture? Since you have a request, how would you know that I can fulfill your request if you don't know who I am? Child, don't be so glib. Yin Yang chuckled. Calm down. It's only natural that I have a request. Just like you said, I, Yin Yang, am a handsome man of my generation. Naturally, I'm not a fool. Chapter 131. Trap? How could it be? Yin Yang smiled. What trap would I dare set up after knowing your identity? The old man looked askance at Yin Yang and nodded, snorting. You, child, are not simple. Not simple at all. You've paid such a high price just to make a bet with me. Let me ask you, how are you so sure? Yin Yang chuckled, knowing that playing mind games with such a person would only backfire, so he told the truth instead. The original intention of this was really a coincidence. I only heard that someone was fishing here, so I was very curious. According to what I know, the fish in this 1,000 feet lake can't be caught, so there are very few people who fish here. Based on this reason, I paid some attention. Then, your attire also made me suspicious. At that time, I was only a little suspicious. When I came here and saw you, that little bit became too. When you suddenly exuded your aura, although it was weak and lasted only for a short time, it still made me suspicious. When I saw your wine gourd, my initial bit of suspicion turned into 30% confidence. Actually, the life of enlightenment that I talked about later was more of a test. Those with a higher realm will be enlightened, while those with a lower realm will think that it makes sense. However, your thanks have increased my confidence. Then, Senior talked about the fish and easily revealed the secret of the 7-scaled fairy in this lake. It's obvious that you don't want to owe me a favor, so you've given me information that exceeds the value of my wine. There aren't many with such a temperament. At this point, my confidence has become 50%. Yin Yang said casually, 50% confidence is enough as a basis for judgment. It doesn't matter whether you're the person I imagined you to be or not. Whether you are or not, my good karma has been sown. The bet is only a means. Whether I win or lose, our friendship already exists. It's hard to erase it. I've won the bet. I can ask one thing of you. I've lost the bet, but with the friendship we have today, we'll meet again one day, even if the martial world is long, and we're at the ends of the earth. Yin Yang smiled and said, people like me won't give up any chance to benefit, but people like you don't care about what I care about. So me recognizing you, and knowing you is no hindrance to you. It was just a very ordinary encounter. Isn't that right? Yin Yang chuckled. What's more coincidental is that I really have nothing to do during this period of time. Fishing is really good. Having someone to accompany me is naturally even better. If I win the bet, I'll gain another benefit. Even if I don't win the bet, I can leave it for another day. It's still good. The old man laughed heartily. You're quite an interesting kid. What's even rarer is that everything you've said in front of me is the truth. It's all from your heart. This is very good. Yin Yang chuckled bitterly. If I had the confidence to deceive you, I would have done so without hesitation. But in front of you, any lie, any ingenious deception is just a joke. If that's the case, just tell me the truth. You'll be happy, and I'll be happy too. There's no need to waste any extra effort. The old man guffawed again. Then he asked, you wouldn't really want to bet on fishing with me, would you? Aren't you a little too bold to bet on fishing with me? Someone who's caught the 7-scaled fairy before? Yin Yang said, there's no loss when there's a bet. You said that you've only caught one 7-scaled fairy in total. What if I'm lucky and really manage to catch one? The old man guffawed again. Good lad, you've got guts indeed. What about the rules of the bet? Yin Yang smiled as well. Of course, whoever catches the 7-scaled fairy first, or whoever catches the most will be the winner. The time limit is 3 days. If you're willing to bet, you must be willing to lose. What are the stakes? The old man asked with narrowed eyes. The stakes? Yin Yang thought about it and said, if you win, I'll think of a way to get you a pot of prime of wine. If you lose the lottery, just do me a favor. The old man snorted. Do you think that pot of wine of yours is worth so much? He looked at Yin Yang from the corner of his eyes. Then tell me. Yin Yang gave up without hesitation. If I lose, what do you want from me? The old man was stunned by Yin Yang's words. What can a small fry like you do for me? How about this? If I lose, I'll agree to any conditions. Yin Yang was eager to help the old man come up with ideas. As long as you win, you can be my godfather or my master. Dream on. The old man rolled his eyes and said resentfully, wanting to be my godson? Wanting to be my master? With your physique, it's simply wishful thinking. Yin Yang smiled faintly. I'm relieved that you won't agree. Of course, the old man did not know that today's rejection would make him regret it for the rest of his life. Wait, what if it's a draw? Don't tell me you're planning to exchange the stakes after a draw, and have this old man do something for you in exchange for you to acknowledge me as your godfather, or be my disciple. The old man's gaze froze. If he could not catch anything, it would naturally be a draw. Yin Yang was taken aback when he heard the old man. He had never thought that a draw would happen. After a pause he said, "You're really thinking too much. If it's a draw, of course, all the stakes will be cancelled. If you're so hesitant or afraid of losing, then there's no harm in not going through with this bet. You don't have to provoke me. This old man will agree to it." The old man was so angry that his goatee was curling up. "Then what about the stakes that you've decided on this, Junior?" Yin Yang asked. "Forget it, a pot of prime of wine it is." The old man seemed to have suffered a great loss as he said resentfully, "This old man will suffer a little loss." He thought that if he had another pot, with the help of the wine's Tao state, he might really be able to break through his current shackles. By then, it would truly be wonderful. This child wants to win me in fishing? It's simply wishful thinking. For this Chilean fish, this old man has honed his fishing skills for so many years and settled his state of mind. Besides, it was still unknown how many Chilean fish there were in the 1,000-feet lake. The possibility of a draw would be the highest after 3 days. This old man would then be able to leave without any burden. How could this child with the surname Yin know that the Chilean fish was the smartest fish species in the world? Once one was caught, the other Chilean fish would sense it and turn into flowing water. They would not be able to be caught again and would not eat anything for at least a year. "Old sir, what bait did you use?" Yin Yang stretched his head over. The old man shrunk back immediately and kept all his bait, hiding it behind his buttocks as he stared at Yin Yang with widened eyes. You want to compete with me in fishing, and you actually came over to ask about my bait? This old man has never seen someone as shameless as you." Yin Yang rubbed his nose sheepishly. "Know thyself and thy enemy, and you will emerge victorious in every battle." He sat back down awkwardly. He took out his bait, crumpled it into a ball, and hung some on the hook. Standing up, he flung the fishing rod out. The fishing rod in Yin Yang's hand was rather famous. It was made of feather bamboo. Not only was it light, it was long enough as well, 30 feet long. The fishing line and other facilities were top-notch as well. However, his skill in casting the hook was unbearable and unsightly. With just a flick of the rod, the old man beside him almost burst out laughing. "An absolute rookie. Let's not talk about how well you flung the rod, but you actually managed to throw the bait away. You still want to fish? With an empty hook? With this level of skill, you actually dare to bet with me? Did this child lose to me on purpose and give me wine to bribe me? Too bad your father doesn't fall for it. I've won. There's no gratitude at all." Yin Yang at least had a good eye, quickly noticing the mistake he had made. He quickly retracted his rod and cast the bait again. This time, it was much better than the first time. An hour later, the old man began to catch fish. Although they were ordinary fish, they came one after another, as if there was no end to them. The speed was incredibly fast, and the fish that were caught grew bigger and bigger. At first, it was the size of a palm, then more than a caddy, 2 caddies, 5 caddies. Now there were more than 10 caddies, 20 caddies, and 30 to 40 caddies that were caught. The old man did not collect the fish that had already taken the bait. Every time a fish took the bait, the old man would flick his finger and knock the fish out before putting it back into the water. The fish floated on the water surface with its belly up for a while, and when it woke up, it would escape. The best thing about this was that it would not dare to take the bait for a few days at least. In terms of success rate, the old man had already caught hundreds of fish, but Yin Yang's float still did not budge. The fish in the 1,000-feet lake are the hardest to catch. There must be something wrong with the bait that this old man is using. Yin Yang was infuriated. This old man is cheating. Yin Yang had not caught a single fish even after a long time. Seeing the old man catching the fish that flew up like it was nothing, one bigger than the other, he was finally infuriated. Who doesn't know how to cheat? Yin Yang had wanted to start cheating tomorrow, but looking at the situation now, he would definitely lose if he did not cheat. After all, the old man had said that he had successfully caught a 7-scaled fairy before. If he managed to catch one, it would be too late for him to cheat then. Yin Yang called out in his mind, "Emmy, come out quickly." Emmy was waving its vines in his deific consciousness space. It retracted its vines immediately when it heard Yin Yang's call, sending a strange message. What are you doing? Why are you calling me? Chapter 132. Aya. Emmy felt wronged. The vines wrapped themselves tightly around him from top to bottom. It did not respond to Yin Yang's greeting. You're using my energy to fish. Are you kidding, big brother? Even if you catch 100,000 caddies of fish, it won't be enough for me to catch one fish. It's the 7-scaled fairy fish. Let me tell you, eating it will bring you great benefits. Aya. Really? Try it if you don't believe me. If it doesn't work, I'll give you 10 jade pendants. Yin Yang promised. Aya? Emmy retracted some of its vines and revealed half of its body, still waving at Yin Yang suspiciously. Really? 10 jade pendants, is that a lot? Aya. Still too little? Emmy, don't be too greedy. All right, as long as you promise, I'll give you 2 jade pendants tomorrow morning. 2 in the morning, 2 at noon, 2 in the afternoon and 2 at night. This should be enough, right? Yin Yang gritted his teeth. Ayaya. Emmy agreed. Its vines danced in joy. It was rare for its master to be so generous, saying that he would give it so many good things tomorrow. A ball of energy was sent out. This ball is too much, it's too wasteful. Can we split it into 100 portions? Yin Yang discussed. Ayaya. A brave man would surely be motivated by a generous reward. Emmy agreed without hesitation and began to work. Yin Yang swung his rod again. The old man at the side looked at the rookie from the corner of his eyes. His heart was still filled with joy and confidence. The newbie is starting again. Ha ha ha. Suddenly, the water in front of Yin Yang's fishing rod surged, as if there were many fishes fighting for it below. The float that had been motionless dropped abruptly. Yin Yang was overjoyed, and quickly lifted the rod. The fishing line swished as a big fish was hooked. The old man could not help but stare. Yin Yang's action of lifting the rod was obviously too late. Under normal circumstances, the fish would have escaped long ago. How did he manage to catch it now? Yin Yang made a fuss, and followed up with a series of clumsy follow-up actions, pulling the rod upwards without any technique at all. After a round of forceful dragging, a big fish weighing more than 10 kilograms was pulled up. The old man was also puzzled. What thread did you use? Yin Yang smiled happily. Wild silk, isn't it? It's pliable enough. The old man was speechless. Where's the hook? It's the black iron hook. Once it's hooked, it won't be able to escape. The old man raised his head to look at the sky, as though he was trying to ascertain whether or not this place was the profound sky continent. The heavenly worm silk was extremely flexible. This was undeniable. But its weight was too light. Once it entered the water, it would inevitably float. Although the weight of the black iron hook was not light, it was filled with cold qi. When fish felt this cold, 99% of them would avoid it. This guy actually used the combination of the natural silk and the black iron hook to catch fish. This was the strangest thing he had ever seen in his life. Luck, it's definitely luck. It's definitely hard to replicate. The old man muttered to himself, and turned his head to continue fishing. Then, he was surprised to find that there were no more fish on his side. On Yin Yang's side, the water was tumbling and the surface was murky. It was as if there was a large group of fish fighting for the bait below, and only those who won would be able to eat it. As if to prove the old man's imagination, the float on Yin Yang's fishing rod sank once again. Yin Yang lifted it, and saw a large fish of more than 20 caddies being hauled up forcefully. The old man was dumbfounded, unable to believe what he was seeing. Then, it was probably the official start of Yin Yang's fishing show. A certain someone had used extremely clumsy fishing skills to continuously pull up one big fish after another, then knock them out and release them back. The surface of the water grew murkier, the splashes heavier. Some of the impatient fish jumped out of the water directly, pouncing towards where Yin Yang's hook was, as if their lives depended on it. This is uncanny, the old man mumbled to himself. I'm not using something ordinary. I'm using treasured ingredients specially prepared for the fish's taste. There's even 1,000-year-old fish heart grass in there. What was going on? What was going on? What bait did you use? The old man finally could not help asking. This? Yin Yang tossed a ball over. The old man took it in his hand and sniffed it, identifying it again and again, confirming that it was the most ordinary bait. He tried to hang it on his hook, but the float did not budge at all, with no fish interested in it. The fish on Yin Yang's side looked like they were going to a market. The surface of the water had already gathered into a large black mass, squeezed into a ball. The old man felt as if his worldview had been turned upside down. Could it be that the fish were especially fond of such rookies now? Otherwise, how could the scene before him be explained? Then, the old man's side became quiet while Yin Yang's side became unprecedentedly busy. One after another, the big fish began to fly up, 20 caddies, 30 caddies, 40 caddies. The biggest one had actually gone up to more than 80 caddies. When the whole fish was hooked up, it was like a small boat being hauled up forcefully. It was fortunate that Yin Yang's fishing line was made of natural silk. If it had been any other material, the fishing line would have been the first to give way and snapped into two. The old man's eyeballs were about to fall out of their sockets. This old man has lived for hundreds of years, and I've never seen such a bizarre thing. Then, the fish on the surface of the water seemed to have disappeared all at once. Yin Yang's side quietened down as well, and the old man heaved a sigh of relief. *T, this is normal. If I can't even catch one, I haven't lost, it's a draw. Just as he was thinking about it, he saw the float on Yin Yang's side shoot up like a rocket. Yin Yang lifted it up. Immediately, a colorful fish emerged from the water's surface. A Chilean fish. The old man looked like he had been struck by lightning. This child actually caught a Chilean fish. Oh my God, am I dreaming? This fish is too small, not even a caddy. What can it do? Yin Yang tilted his head to study the fish before putting it into his bucket. Too small. The old man wanted to cry. Such a big Chilean fish was already extremely rare. This old man has been fishing for hundreds of years, but I've only caught one such big Chilean fish. As he thought about it, the old man's eyes widened again. Yin Yang's float sank again. Lifting it up, another colorful fish floated up. It was another Chilean fish. Moreover, it was twice the size of the previous one. At least 2 caddies. The old man felt dizzy. This world isn't going to collapse, right? Why was the Chilean fish so easy to catch? Once the Chilean fish was caught, the others would be frightened and would not eat any bait for at least a year. Forget about the details. It's more important to cast the hook and fish quickly. The old man hurriedly lowered his rod and focused, but his float did not budge. After a dozen breaths, there was another splash from Yin Yang's side. Another Chilean fish that weighed more than a caddy had come up. Another one. Another one. Another one. Wow, here comes another big one. This one is about 5 kilograms in weight. What a big fish. It had only been an hour, but the bucket beside Yin Yang seemed to be full. It was filled with Chilean fish that were still bobbing up and down. There were more than 20 of them. The old man was completely dumbfounded. The number of fish that he had caught in his entire life could not compare to the number that this child had caught in an hour. How many Chilean fish were there in the entire lake? He was afraid that they would all be swept clean after this. Yin Yang cast the rod again. This time, however, there was still no movement after a long time. The old man heaved a long sigh. His loss this time was inexplicable, but it was a crushing defeat. He had never lost so badly in a bet in his entire life. Just as he was sighing, he heard Yin Yang cry out in shock. The fishing rod was actually flying towards the lake like an arrow. This fellow had actually been pulled away by the big fish in his absent-mindedness. I'm King wronged. The old man shook his head speechlessly. He sprung up and caught up to the fishing rod that was drifting towards the center of the lake. With a flick of his hand, a rainbow-colored fish flew out of the water. Looking at the big fish, the old man almost lost his breath in the air and fell into the lake. Chilean fish. This one was at least 20 caddies. How could there be such a big Chilean fish in this world? When the fish was pulled up, Yin Yang thanked him profusely. Old sir, it's getting late now. Why don't we call it a day? We'll continue the competition tomorrow. The old man almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Continue the competition? Compete what? You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.